Madam Deputy Speaker, it's always nice to have the chance to discuss sanctions with a fellow and former sanctions minister. It's one of the most extraordinarily complex but impactful tools that the FCDO has to make clear the UK's views and direction. And I would happily take my honourable friend's comments away, but as I say, we will. The work is constant and ongoing. In fact, we've more than doubled the team in the last year in the Sanctions Directorate, but we won't discuss in anticipation any new sanctions that might be brought forward.
Vera Hopehouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister tell the House what discussions she has had with the US and Australia about coordinating an Interpol early warning system to protect pro-democracy activists overseas?
Madam Deputy Speaker, officials have regular conversations with allies and partners around the world and working with Interpol to ensure that those rules that need to be maintained are, and of course to ensure that we can use the international powers to protect those, as I say, here from those extraterritorial reach.
Fiona Bruce.
This recent development is yet another example of China's outrageous disregard of fundamental human rights and freedoms, and one can hardly imagine how the decent, honourable and brave young man Nathan Law is feeling now, a young man I had the privilege of meeting in this place. He needs to know, and others affected need to know, that we are doing everything we can to defend their freedoms, and I'm sure our like-minded international partners feel the same. So, what is the UK doing to show leadership following this announcement and to work with our international partners to stand up for the people of Hong Kong and call out this particular violation of their rights and freedoms and to hold China to its international obligations?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Honourable Lady is always a champion and a strong voice, and I thank her for the support she is giving to those who are feeling under great strain. Some of the challenges that remain, of course, we suspended our extradition agreement with Hong Kong in July 2020, but there are 13 countries who have still not done so. Hong Kong, despite the national security law being brought in, including 2 European ones, Czech Republic and Portugal, and indeed 11 others, including countries like Singapore, Malaysia, the Philippines, South Korea and India. So we continue to work closely with them to ask them to reconsider their position to ensure that those who need to be able to maintain their freedom of expression in their countries are able to do so safely.
Deputy Speaker, my constituent Carlos A. Young has written to me about this and the significant distress and fear within the Hong Konger community about exerting of extraterritorial enforcement on British soil, and saying that this requires immediate attention and action. Now, I listened very carefully when the Minister answered my honourable friend on the front bench and the Chair of the Select Committee, who both called for her to meet with representatives of the Chinese embassy here in London, to call them into the Foreign Office to address them down about this matter, and she just did not answer their question. So can she answer that now so the House can be better informed?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary has meetings with many during the week, and I will take away, and I'm sure the message in the Department will have heard of the importance of these matters, and we will continue to have those ongoing discussions, but importantly also, as colleagues have said, to ensure that these concerns, which are so clearly heard, rightly so, will be featured because we will be publishing our annual human rights report. I want to say next week, but I think the correct term is imminently, just in case the printers don't work on time, in which China sadly will have a featuring part.
Andy Carter.
Deputy Speaker, I had the privilege of meeting members of Hong Kong Watch last Thursday, including representatives from the 3,000 recently arrived BNOs that have come to settle in Warrington. What was very clear was the fear that they have for family members, often elderly family members, that they've left behind in Hong Kong. And of course, they are now unable to return to see many of those family members. They asked that I ask the Minister to assure the House that she will continue to push for progress on human rights issues in China and particularly in Hong Kong, including rights to freedom of expression. Can she give that message to members of the BNO community in Warrington?
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's heartening to know that colleagues from across the House are so closely involved with the BNOs who are coming to the UK to make their new homes, and I thank him for his commitment to that, and I can absolutely give him the FCJ and this government will continue to make clear our disagreement, in fact our shocking objection to the national security law and the impact it's having on freedoms.
Kirsten Oswald.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is clearly a dangerous escalation in Beijing's global war on dissent. I wonder if the Minister is able to confirm that it is actually illegal to issue and pursue bounties in the UK, and confirm that the UK Government will be actively seeking the prosecution of anyone who aims to take these up. I also wonder if the Minister is able to confirm what the thinking is of the UK Government in relation to targeted financial sanctions of those in government in Hong Kong, something that she has been less than clear about in this session, I feel, and similarly it is concerning that she has been less than clear about what her intentions are in terms of meeting officials and conveying the deep unhappiness of members in this House and the significant concern we have for Hong Kongers in the UK.
Here.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can confirm, of course, that these extra national bounties have no validity here. We have no extradition treaty with Hong Kong because we have suspended it indefinitely, and therefore there is no reach to those people here. And any attempt by any foreign power to intimidate, harass or harm individuals in the UK will not be tolerated. As I say, the Security Minister is working through the Defending Democracy Task Force to review our approach, and I need to ensure that we have all the robust tools that we need to protect those who are here.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Only just last week I met with a constituent in Keighley who was deeply concerned about the eroding of democracy in Hong Kong. So will the Minister assure me and the House that the UK will always defend the universal right to freedom of expression and stand up for those who are targeted in Hong Kong and around the world by China?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I can give him that absolute assurance. And indeed, I hope that when the Human Rights Report is published shortly, there will be clarity for all those who wish to do so to see just how clearly the UK takes its obligations.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, bounties for people is the stuff of films, not the stuff of real life in this United Kingdom. It has become the normal, the despicable behaviour of the Chinese Communist Party for those who dare to have dissent from their thought and to request freedom and liberty. The world are united alongside those from Hong Kong who espouse and wish to have this free expression. What further steps can the House and our Government and our City of State take to support those who live in the United Kingdom and whom we have a moral obligation to speak up for and not to be silent? Thank you.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we continue to call on Beijing to remove the national security law and indeed for the Hong Kong authorities to end their targeting of those who stand up for freedom and democracy in country, and this terrible step that we've seen this week will simply continue to ensure that we absolutely categorically make clear through the engagement that we have in the UK and across our international partnerships that we all stand for freedom of speech and expression for all those citizens across Hong Kong.
I thank the Minister for answering the urgent question, and we now come to business questions. Thangam Debiner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, to ask the Leader of the House if she will give us the forthcoming business.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The business for the week commencing the 10th of July will include, on Monday the 10th of July, a debate on the first special report of the Committee of Privileges, followed by remaining stages of the Electronic Trade Documents Bill Lords, followed by second reading of the Northern Ireland Budget Number 2 Bill. Tuesday the 11th of July, consideration of Lords amendments to the Illegal Migration Bill. Wednesday the 12th of July, Opposition Day, 20th allotted day, debate in the name of the official opposition subject to be announced. Thursday the 13th of July, debate on a motion on the second report of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the cost of complacency, illicit finance and the war in Ukraine, and the government response, followed by general debate on the third report from the Health and Social Care Committee, workforce recruitment, training and retention in health and social care, and the government response. The subjects for these debates were determined by the Backbench Business Committee at the recommendation of the Liaison Committee. Friday the 14th of July, the House will not be sitting. Monday the 17th of July, consideration of Lord's message to the illegal migration bill, followed by consideration of Lord's message to the Social Housing Regulation Bill Lords, followed by consideration of Lord's message to the Strikes Minimum Service Levels Bill. On Tuesday the 18th of July, if necessary, consideration of Lord's message to the illegal migration bill, followed by consideration of Lord's amendments to the Northern Ireland Troubles, Legacy and Reconciliation Bill, followed by, if necessary, consideration of Lord's message. Wednesday the 19th of July, if necessary, consideration of Lord's message to the illegal migration bill, followed by a debate on the Committee on Standards report on all party parliamentary groups, followed by, if necessary, consideration of Lord's message. Thursday the 20th of July, the Sir David Amess summer adjournment debate. The subject for this debate was determined by the Backbench Business Committee. The House will rise before the summer recess at the conclusion of business on Thursday the 20th of July and return on Monday the 4th of September.
Shadow Leader of the House, Thangam Debonair.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Leader for the forthcoming business. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to address the Standards Committee's report published this morning into the Member for Tamworth. I am shocked and saddened at its findings, and my thoughts, and I hope the thoughts of the whole House, are with the victims. As well as the impact on them of the member's behaviour, the committee found that the actions of the member significantly affected the public's perception of this House. I'm afraid to say that shamefully it appears the Conservative Party had protected and even promoted him despite a previous investigation into his conduct. So I am concerned that she has not announced the motion to approve the report in the business. I do hope the government isn't attempting to delay any possible by-election. So could she confirm that she will bring forward this motion as soon as possible, that the government will then be recommending approving the report and its sanctions, and will this include the Prime Minister? Can she confirm that the Prime Minister will show some backbone this time and actually condemn the actions of the member? And if he does not do the decent thing and resign, will she ensure that she allocates the time with speed and urgency that the activities need? Or does she want me to remind her week after week that sexual harassment is not acceptable? So, to continue, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to wish the England cricket team the best of luck as they start the third test against Australia today. And on that note, the remaining legislation the Leader announced up to summer is more like a series of dot balls. Where is the drive? They've got a huge majority, they aren't doing anything with it. And instead, the Prime Minister is wasting precious time on the floor of this House trying to pass red meat for a small group of right-wing backbenchers rather than new laws that will actually help working people. Why didn't the Leader announce the Transport Bill? Or the Mental Health Bill that's been left in limbo? Or the much-needed Schools Bill that they've now completely abandoned? Where's the Leasehold Reform Bill? Millions of people around the country will be furious that the government has once again failed to introduce long-promised and much-needed leasehold reforms. They were a 2019 Conservative manifesto commitment, have been promised by almost every housing secretary since. So where is the bill? Labour forced the government into committing to end the sale of new private leaseholds and replace existing ones with common hold. Our motion passed with a majority of 174 without a single vote against. So where is the government's plan? Our motion also instructed the Secretary of State to make an oral statement to MPs by the 23rd of June. Where is he? He's 13 days late and counting, hiding in the dressing room, sending out the night watchman when there is an entire session left. Will the leader find the Housing Secretary, get him to the dispatch box to explain to leaseholders why he's dragging his feet? Madam Deputy Speaker, instead of scoring runs, this Prime Minister is running scared of scrutiny. Too weak to turn up to Prime Minister's questions, he wouldn't even try batting away questions on his failing record yesterday, a so-called leader who can't even defend his own wicket, when any credible Prime Minister would accept the need for scrutiny and answer the questions from colleagues on behalf of the people we represent. It's not just PMQs, though, is it? He barely makes an appearance these days, didn't show up or even give an opinion on his predecessor's lies last month. I did notice that he managed to find time to watch the cricket, so I am hoping that this speech might catch his attention. Could the leader tell us whether the Prime Minister will stand up to those senior members of his own party who attempted to undermine and attack the democratic institutions of this House and vote for the motion on Monday from the Committee of Privileges? The public deserves to know what he thinks, and they want a Prime Minister who stands up for standards. Madam Deputy Speaker, just like at Lords on Sunday, the ball is dead, it is the end of the over, and we're heading towards the end of the innings. The Tories have sent out their last batsman, he's out for a golden duck, the Prime Minister's got nothing to show the people of this country, he's failed to bring down the cost of living, failed to bring down waiting lists, failed to stop the dangerous boat crossing, so shouldn't he, like Ben Stokes, consider what's in the spirit of the game? It's time he declared and called a general election.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I just start by saying how delighted I was to attend the service of thanksgiving and dedication for His Majesty King Charles III at St Giles Cathedral, Edinburgh, yesterday. And I want to thank all who were involved in what was an absolutely magnificent day, and also add my voice to the many tributes that have been paid this week to all those who work in and alongside the National Health Service for its 75 years of service, and also commemorate the 35th anniversary of the Piper Alpha disaster. And I'm sure thoughts across the House are with all those responding to the incident in London that's occurred this morning. The Honourable Lady, I'm sure, sends a message to the England cricket team that we would all echo, and we all want them to do well. But on that, could I ask the Honourable Lady, can I make a plea to her and her party to perhaps assist in that, and to tell Just Stop Oil to just stop it? Not content in interrupting car runs, they are now intent on interrupting cricket runs. And I'm all for frustrating the Australian batsmen, but I think that is the England cricket team's job. In all seriousness, we've seen some awful scenes this week, particularly at the tennis, and I think it's particularly callous interrupting sporting events, which can turn the course of a match and risk injury to players. And I appreciate the connections between the selfish and counterproductive group of people and the Labour Party's coffers, which might also explain why Labour's energy policy undermines our energy security and prosperity, and the fact that Labour have voted against every measure we have brought forward to end dangerous and disruptive process. And I hope we will see no more such scenes that we have seen at those sporting events, and wish all taking part in what is a sport-packed weekend this weekend all good luck for it. With regard to our proposals on for renters and on leasehold reform, we remain committed to those, and I will update the House in the usual way. But turning to the very serious matter the Honourable Lady focuses on standards. And let me make first of all a broad point. The House knows my view on these matters. The only way we will improve the situation here is to recognise that we're not just one organisation, but a community of many, and that processes and volume of standards bodies, 13 separate entities and counting, does not improve behaviour. Only cultural change will do that. And the key to that is to deepen our understanding of the duty of care we have towards each other. We are custodians of the trust and authority of this place. And I have set out my intention to, with external advice, conclude my own assessment of where we need to focus in this place. These findings I will make available to the Commission, and to the Honourable Lady opposite, and the Standards Committee. I held a private session with the Standards Committee this week to tell them of my concerns and suggested solutions. And I have also told them and the Speaker that I think that the ICGS review needs to be brought forward. And finally, as the Honourable Lady will know, and I thank her for her support, I'm establishing a forum between political parties, government and the House to ensure that we can work together in the best way possible to support MPs, prospective MPs, there and the staff of the House. And I'm supported in all that work by the Prime Minister. She mentions the matter of the privileges motion. I will not dwell on that today. We will be able to debate that, and we will both be able to say what we think on Monday. And with regard to the report published today at 9 a.m, the government doesn't set the timetable for the publication of that report. It is the Standards Committee's report, and they have published it today. The Honourable Lady will appreciate that the Honourable Member concerned has 10 days to appeal. And we must let due process run its course. But she knows that we take these matters incredibly seriously, and further business will be announced in the usual way.
Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Can I thank my reverend friend for what she's said? 8 days ago, on the 28th of June, before the debate on the hybrid bill for the Holocaust Memorial, after I'd come into the chamber, a written statement from the Minister was put in the library saying that the estimated cost in 1 year had gone up by more than twice the £17 million, which the government has already spent without achieving anything. Can I ask my right honourable friend if the department thinks that's an appropriate way of putting important information into the public domain when neither minister speaking in the debate mentioned that increase of nearly £36 million and no MP in the chamber knew about it? Can I just ask her if she'll ask the Permanent Secretary in the Department to report this to the National Audit Office and ask them to update the report they made a year ago?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for his question. He should know, because I think the letter would have been copied to his office, that I have written to the department on that matter, and I shall certainly again make sure they've heard his comments today.
SNP spokesperson Richard Thompson.
Here, here. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Leader for giving us the business, and also endorse once again the remarks that the Shadow Leader has made in relation to standards. I'd also like to add my own remarks regarding the 35th anniversary of the Piper Alpha tragedy, and I'm sure our thoughts are very much with all of those who continue to be affected by those tragic events 35 years ago to this day. I would also like to say how pleased I am that the Leader of the House enjoyed her visit to St Giles Cathedral yesterday for the service of Thanksgiving, and just to say that I hope she didn't suffer from a bout of sword envy when she saw Dame Catherine Granger carrying out that duty yesterday. But this week, of course, sees the 75th anniversary of the foundation of the NHS, the inspiration for which came from the experience of the Highlands and Islands Medical Service, which was established in 1913. And I'd like to add very much my own words of thanks for the contribution that NHS staff, past, present and future, have made and will make to our collective health and well-being as a nation. Now, last week I asked the Leader to make some time for a debate on why 6 police forces in England continue to remain in special measures, and why NHS sickness and staff in England has hit a record high. And there are, alas, no signs of any debates being forthcoming on that. So could I add to that list a request that we also have a debate on why 28 NHS trusts and integrated care boards across England are in similar special measures, so we can find out again what the government intends to do about it. Now, finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, this week members of the Orkney Islands Council agreed that they should explore options for alternative models of governance, including exploring their Nordic connections, with there being some suggestions that they might wish to rejoin Norway and exploit their historical links there. Now, I think it's very easy for those of us in these benches to see the attractions of being part of a small, prosperous, energy-rich, independent country of 5.5 million. So the only question is the constitutional means by which that could be given effect if a part of the UK wished to leave. So asking for approximately 5.5 million friends, could we have a debate on how that might happen, please?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, first of all, I will join the Honourable Gentleman in congratulating Dame Catherine Granger on the incredible job she did. There was a lovely moment in the cathedral where we both caught each other's eye and gave each other a very massive grin. She did a tremendous job, and it was really an incredibly moving service, and again thank everyone that took part in that. The Honourable Gentleman quite often criticises me for being well prepared for our exchanges, and I'm a former Girl Guide. I believe in that sort of thing, but it is very easy to prepare to answer questions from him, because they are usually focused on one thing, and it's not an issue that is of any relevance to the people the Honourable Gentleman represents. If he were less focused on the cause of independence and more focused on their needs, we might have more clarity around the confusions and concerns on their new policy on free fishing zones this week, announced by their coalition partners, which is going to increase those areas to 47%. And I think, given the Honourable Gentleman's brief, he might like to look into that. But if being well prepared is the qualification for a person doing my job, then surely it is self-delusion and lack of self-awareness that is a necessary condition for the opposition on the SNP bench's job. Because only an SNP spokesman would come to this question session and ask me a question about police investigations and police performance. Maybe that self-delusion is hard to sustain in the wake of tens of police investigations, of more news this week of missing accounts frustrating the SNP's auditors from being able to complete their task, and also of news of exactly how much Scottish taxpayers' money has been spent by the SNP on just one of their foreign jollies. For COP27, they blew nearly £150,000, and not content with their, staying in Sharm el-Sheikh and flying back to Scotland, they also managed to do an overnight in Milan. No wonder so many of the Honourable Gentleman's colleagues are heading off. Quitting because the going is too tough in opposition is really quite something.
Sir Charles Walker.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we first came across each other as colleagues during a review of the Mental Health Act 1983. I would say at times we were frenemies, but now we are firm friends. Can I say to the Leader of the House, I spent a large amount of last year and a little bit of this year as a member of the Joint Committee on the draft Mental Health Bill. It's a hugely important bill. It's a very complex bill, but one of the things it will do, it will ensure that when people are ill, having a mental health crisis, their wishes in regards to their treatment are better respected. Please, can we bring this bill to the floor of the House and turn it into an act?
Well, can I pay tribute to all the work my right honourable friend has done on this, and enabled members across the House to contribute to it also. That bill has been through the joint committee processes, as he rightly points out. I would suggest that he raise this at the next health questions, which is on the 11th of July, but I will also make sure that all those involved in preparing fourth session legislation, as well as the Health Secretary, have heard what he has said.
Chair of the Backbench Business Committee, Ian Mearns.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. A very short advert from me this week. The Backbench Business Committee is very much open for business, and we would very much welcome applications for debates for here in the Chamber and in Westminster Hall for the September sitting weeks immediately after the summer recess. So please take note, everyone, we do have some time available if, of course, the time was awarded to us by the government. Madam Deputy Speaker, as Chair of the All-Party Group for Parental Participation in Education, earlier this week I was pleased to welcome visitors from some of the award winners from this year's National Parent-Teacher Association Awards and hear about their activities. Will the Leader of the House join me in not only congratulating the award winners but also recognising the invaluable contribution of all PTAs across the country to our schools and our communities?
Well, can I thank the Honourable Gentleman for again a very helpful advert for the Backbench Business Committee and encourage all members to use that innovation. And also join with him, as I'm sure all members of the House would want to do, in thanking all PTAs for the incredible work that they do in schools, but also in their local community.
Please, Villiers.
Can we have a debate on acquired brain injury so I can highlight the work of my constituent, Dr. Shanshan Jing, who became a victim of this condition after a tragic car collision and is now bravely campaigning to improve care and treatment for others with acquired brain injury.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for raising this very important matter and also pay tribute to her constituent for doing likewise. She will know that the next Health Questions is on the 11th of this month, but I will also make sure the department has heard her concerns and focus on this matter.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to raise the issue of back-of-house drug testing within UK festivals. For years, the testing of confiscated drugs on-site at UK festivals has played a successful part in safeguarding harm reduction strategies and drug intelligence sharing. But the Home Office made a last-minute decision just before the recent Parklife Festival in Manchester to withdraw permission to carry out back-of-house drug testing, putting thousands of people's lives at risk. And this matter was raised with the leader last week. What I want to stress is this sudden change in policy will see festivals forced to apply for individual drug testing licences, which can take up to 3 months to process and which must be administered within a permanent building. These are not sensible conditions for festivals, and senior people in the nighttime industry say will all but remove back-of-house drug testing on site for the remainder of the 2023 festival season. This is dangerous, and I believe it could lead to more fatalities at festivals where drugs are not tested. Given that we're now into the festival season, I ask the Leader of the House if we can have an urgent debate on this vital issue.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady for raising this yet again, and she will know, because she alludes to it, the answer I gave at this dispatch box last week, and that is indeed what the Home Office have told me, that applications were not received. But clearly, this is a pressing matter. There will be festivals over the summer, so I shall ask the Home Secretary to convene a meeting before the rise of the House so that the policy on this can be clear, and also I will suggest that any festival that is wanting to run this service is also given the information that they need so that such licences can be given in a timely way.
Sir John Redwood.
It would be better to get inflation down by expanding supply rather than hitting mortgage holders again to get them to spend less. Can we have an urgent statement before the summer break from the government on measures to expand our domestic output of food, oil and gas industrial products with suitable incentives and facilitations?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for that very helpful suggestion. He will know that as Treasury questions are not until after the summer recess, he will have no opportunity to raise it there. So I will certainly make sure that the Chancellor has heard his suggestion, and I know that that will be welcomed by many members across the House.
Vera Hobhouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, for some time we've been promised a transport bill to establish Great British Rail. In this parliamentary session, the bill is ready to go. It's only short, and unusually it's unlikely to be controversial, so it won't take much parliamentary time. We are consistently rising early, so why the delay? Can she confirm that it is actually the Prime Minister who is blocking this bill? And if so, can she ensure that the Prime Minister himself comes to the House and explains why he is blocking a bill that will actually unusually get widespread support in this House?
Well, the Honourable Lady will know, given where we are on a number of important bills, that that business is dynamic, if I can put it in those terms, and this business statement I have given will be dynamic. She will know that she tempts me to comment on future business, which I will announce in the usual way. And of course, we are preparing now for the 4th session.
Pauline Latham.
Plants do not provide a viable electricity producing solution for the UK's net zero transition. They do not keep energy bills low or reduce carbon emissions. By 2027, UK energy bill payers will have paid £13 billion in subsidies developing this technology. In a climate of increasing energy bills for UK households, it's wholly unjust to require them to pay any more. Would the leader arrange for a statement on how the government is independently verifying the environmental and economic benefits of this technology?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this important point. She will know that suppliers have to demonstrate to the regulator that they meet sustainability criteria, and there is a process by which the Treasury will arrive at what carve-outs it is going to do for particular sectors. I think we've been very much right to do that for emerging technologies which can't currently compete on cost. Tidal power, solar space is another example that we will no doubt look at in the future. And she's right to raise the issue of getting value for money for British taxpayers.
Clive Efford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I wonder if the Leader of the House could contact her colleagues at the MOD. On the 8th of June, veterans for the LGBT community were expecting the LGBT report to be published. Many service people were forced out of the services, having their careers cut short and denied opportunities for pensions. And they are expecting that report imminently, but a date has not yet been given. And we're fast approaching the end of term. Could she arrange for a statement to be made, please?
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question? I know several members of the House have raised this matter. I have written already to the MOD, but I will follow up after this session and ensure that all members who've raised this have an update on when that will be published.
David Mundell.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I associate myself with the comments about Piper Alpha? Over the years, I've been heavily involved with many issues that flowed from the aftermath of that horrendous incident. Could I ask the Leader of the House to bring forward a debate on local news provision across the UK? Ian Pollock, who's the editor of the Dumfries and Galloway Standard, has recently been in touch with me about concerns about the BBC's across the UK proposals, which will see money diverted from local radio stations into online services. Many local newspapers rely on those online services either through subscriptions or from advertising for their viability and are concerned about the BBC's move into this area.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for raising this important point. I know, because it is raised very regularly in business questions, how vital and how valuable local news services are. The next questions to the Culture, Media and Sport Secretary of State will be on the 20th of July, and I would encourage him to raise this matter with her.
Amy Callaghan.
Speaker, the Deputy Leader of the SNP has said she will not stand again at the next election, and the Leader of the House, because of the toxic nature of this place, and the Leader of the House would do better than to make a joke at her expense over that. Sunscreen products are too expensive, Madam Deputy Speaker. Research from Melanoma Focus has shown that 2/3 of people surveyed would use sunscreen products if they were 20% cheaper. Would the Leader of the House make time for a debate on my VAT burn campaign, which has cross-party support both in this place and in the Scottish Parliament, to reform the VAT charged on sunscreen and to raise awareness of melanoma and non-melanoma skin cancers?
Thank the honourable lady for her question, and other members have also raised this matter. As a consequence, I have written to the relevant departments, the Treasury and Health, and of course we can only consider these options because we are now outside of the EU.
Vicky Aiken.
Madam Deputy Speaker, 28th of July sees us mark World Hepatitis Day, and I'd like to take the opportunity to pay tribute to campaigner Philip Baldwin, who has worked passionately to raise the awareness of hepatitis C and HIV and the stigma surrounding both these diseases. As we mark the NHS's 75th anniversary this week, I would also like to take the opportunity to highlight the progress that has been made in fighting these diseases. And now, thanks to research carried out at local hospitals, particularly at St Mary's in my constituency, these diseases, Hep C and HIV, are no longer the life sentences that they used to be. So in light of this, would my right honourable friend please consider a debate on the importance of government support and funding for medical research to help us defeat previously thought indomitable diseases?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising awareness about these very important areas. She will know that the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence have approved treatments that now can cure the Hep C virus in over 90% of patients, and we as well have the commitment to ending new HIV transmissions by 2030, and we have just signed up to an international programme to also eliminate the hepatitis virus by the same year. These are incredibly important matters, and it is our Department of Health, our NHS, and our incredible life science community that are helping these incredible achievements happen.
Christine Wakeford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This week is Alcohol Awareness Week, with the theme being alcohol and cost, with the ultimate cost being alcohol-specific deaths, which have risen sharply since 2019. The 9,641 deaths registered in 2021 saw a 27.4% increase on figures from 2019, with figures in 2022 set to rise even further. Alcohol duty may bring in around £12 billion, but the cost it has on our health service and society can be anything from £35 to £50 billion, which I'm sure the leader will agree with makes no sense, but more importantly, no fiscal sense. Therefore, can we have a debate in government time on a full alcohol strategy, especially it's been over a decade since the last one, and things are going backwards and lives are being lost.
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this very important matter, which he may also wish to raise with the Health Secretary on the 11th of July. He will know that there has been a huge push in particular parts of the country where this is a particular issue, but of course it is relevant everywhere. For example, innovations of automatic screening services when people come into accident and emergency to identify people who may need further support and services. But it is a good topic for a debate, and I would encourage him to answer the call of the chairman of the Backbench Business Committee. I'm sure if he applied for a debate, it would be well attended.
Douglas Ross.
About rural colleges. I remind the Chamber that I'm a former student of the Scottish Agricultural College, and like many people across Scotland and the UK, I benefited from the experience of Hugh McClymont, who has retired from Scotland's Rural College after more than 4 decades. For 43 years, Hugh has been part of the fabric of SRUC and has been widely recognised for his contribution to Scottish education, dairy farming and grassland management. So will the Leader of the House join me in congratulating Hugh for his immense contribution to Scottish agriculture, and to thank him for the encouragement and support he has provided to so many?
Well, I'm sure the whole House would want to join with the honourable gentleman in thanking Hugh for the very long list of achievements and contributions that he has made to that community in particular. Not least, I understand, he is responsible for Daisy, a life-size plastic cow that he took round various areas in 2012 to raise awareness of the Royal Highland Education Trust.
On Daisy, yes. Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In her answer to me on the 8th of June 2023, the Leader of the House said on risk-based exclusions that, and I quote, "It is the intention of both the Commissioner and myself to bring forward a motion following that debate. There is time to do that before the summer recess." Well, we are rapidly running out of parliamentary time, and with fresh concerning allegations aired on Newsnight last night and the publication today of yet another report of serious sexual misconduct by an MP, How much longer will we have to wait before we take the necessary steps to make Parliament a safer workplace and begin to repair its public reputation?
Well, the Honourable Lady will know this is a matter for the Commission, and I hope Commissioners will not mind me saying that we are looking at this at our Commission meeting on Monday. There is still the ability to bring forward something before the summer recess. That is still our intention, but she will know, because she attended, and I thank her for it, the debate we had on this, that there are some issues that the House asked the Commission to look at, and we will do that. But I would reassure her and all colleagues that we want to bring forward measures, but it is the House that will decide what those measures are.
Sarah Atherton.
Speaker, the Defence Committee's Women in the Armed Forces report highlighted military sexual trauma exists. Thankfully, a number of MOD's strategies and support mechanisms are now in place to prevent and manage this. But evidence also highlights that men can be subject to military sexual trauma. Now, the OVA has funded a research project with the charity Forward Assist to look at formulating a male-specific MST support pathway for servicemen and veterans. Would the Leader of the House join me in urging any such man suffering in silence to contact Forward Assist? They're there to help, and to congratulate Tony Wright and his team for the work they do on this very difficult subject.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady, first of all, for all the work she does on these and related matters. It is hugely appreciated, I know, by all who serve, and to thank Tony and his team at Forward Assist for the work they are doing. I would absolutely echo her plea for people to come forward if they are facing issues of this nature, and the Honourable Lady alludes to other services, the Aurora service that provides confidential independent support to any serving member who is experiencing sexual violence, domestic abuse or stalking, and Together All, which is an independent digital mental health support tool which is also available for all those serving and veterans.
Simon Lightwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Residents in Terrell Court in Wakefield got a shock this year when their social landlord, Wakefield and District Housing, added a new service charge for communal energy for things like lighting. Some have been tenants over 20 years and have never had to pay that before. That's an extra £125 on top of recent rent increases. Many residents are elderly, on fixed incomes, and will struggle to find this extra money. According to Shelter, this is not a unique case. So can we please have a statement from the Housing Minister on any steps the government can take in situations like this?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for raising this issue, and it is similar to other issues other honourable members have raised. He will know that the next questions to the Housing Minister will be on Monday, but he will also know that I have previously written as well to the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero to raise these concerns, and they are doing bespoke surgeries for any colleagues that has casework of this nature.
Richard Fuller.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the recent transfer of the administration of Help to Buy equity loans from Target to Lenvy has been handled extremely poorly. Market participants and holders of loans weren't advised of the change, and constituents who have loans advise me that they make numerous calls, send emails into Lenvy with no response. Remortgaging can be a time-sensitive matter. So can the Leader advise me what steps I can do to raise the importance of this matter with the relevant department?
Well, first of all, I would thank the Honourable Gentleman for looking at this very important issue. We have helped 837,000 people onto the property ladder through these schemes, and what we do not want to happen is for further people we wish to assist to be discouraged in coming forward, or people who are already in the scheme not being able to make the financial decisions that they wish to because of poor service by a provider. He will know that the next levelling up questions are on Monday, but given the seriousness and the timeliness of this, I shall also make sure the Secretary of State has heard his comments today in advance.
Speaker. The upgrade to Lodge Hill Junction in Abingdon, an infrastructure project key to nearly 2,000 homes in the Vale of Whitehorse, is stuck. The very final piece of funding from Homes England is languishing for sign-off with the Treasury, but now an earlier piece of funding that was secured from the Department for Levelling Up is in question due to the Treasury delay. If this stalemate between departments isn't resolved by the end of this month, the whole project and more besides will be at risk, and I'm at my wit's end. I held a Westminster Hall debate on this 2 months ago, and since then I've tried everything to get the departments to engage common sense mode. So can the Leader of the House please help me to secure a meeting with Treasury ministers so that this vital scheme doesn't have to wait a moment longer?
Well, I shall certainly make sure that Treasury Ministers have heard what the Honourable Lady has said today. We have these schemes in place because we want to get funding into local communities, and we have a great track record of doing that. But she will also know that the next Levelling Up questions are on Monday, and I would encourage her to raise this matter with the Secretary of State in what I think is panning out to be a busy and question-packed session on Monday.
Suzanne Webb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, ultra-processed food is linked with obesity. This is because it is high in fat, sugar, salt, and it is highly addictive. 64% of adults in England are either obese or overweight, and 40% of 10 to 11-year-olds. The cost to the NHS is staggering at £6.5 billion a year. Please, can we have a debate in government time on the role ultra-processed food has to play in the obesity crisis?
Well, this, as the Honourable Lady will know, is of huge concern to the Department for Health, but other departments are also involved in combating what is one of the drivers of immense costs that our National Health Service is facing. There is innovation happening all the time. She will know about bringing forward and making accessible on the NHS particular drugs to help people who are suffering from obesity issues. But of course, we need to tackle all of the factors in this, and I think if she were to apply for a debate on this particular topic, it would be very well attended.
Evan Brennan.
Can I thank the Leader for taking up the issue I raised the other week about legal aid fees in asylum cases, and I did, as she always encourages people to do, and raised it also at Home Office questions this Monday. And at volume 735, column 540, the Minister, the Immigration Minister, said, "I can assure the Honourable Gentleman that the problem with our asylum system is not a lack of lawyers. There are plenty of legal representatives around." And then I read in yesterday's Financial Times that the government is consulting on a 15% increase in legal aid fees for lawyers working on deportation cases to attract solicitors to take on such cases and tackle the backlog of asylum claims. Wouldn't it be helpful if we asked ministers not to weaponise asylum cases and lawyers and so on, and to focus on measures that will reduce the backlog?
Well, as the Honourable Gentleman will know, we are focusing on measures that will reduce the backlog, and we're also focusing on measures that will target the finite resource that this country has to help genuine asylum seekers and those in need, and refugees, many of which are languishing in camps across the world. That is why we have brought forward measures which have recently been in the House of Lords, and we will be bringing those back to this House, as I announced in my business statement. And I would encourage the Honourable Gentleman and his colleagues opposite to back those measures that are going to mean we can have an asylum system that is fit for purpose.
Peter Gibson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Last week I met with my constituent Rose Elgie, who attends St Teresa's Primary School in Darlington. She is deeply concerned about the destruction of orangutan habitats as a result of deforestation caused by unsustainable palm oil production. Can my right honourable friend outline what the government is doing to reduce our reliance on palm oil? And can she find time for us to have a debate on how we can help to save the orangutans and their habitats?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question. He will know that we have a number of incredible forestry programmes around the world. There is one habitat off the top of my head, which is in Indonesia, which is a forest larger than the size this country. And that is particularly supporting a habitat where there is a large colony of orangutans that would otherwise be their existence being threatened. Some of these forestry programs that we've had in place in this country around the world are decades old, and I think it is testament to the impact this nation has had on these matters, and this government has absolutely made sure that we will continue to have that impact globally.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Billions of pounds were wasted on useless PPE, and there's no plan in place to build a stockpile for future pandemics. In addition, there are no proper records of £3.3 billion of NHS test and trace purchases, and Number 10 has simply written off £14.9 billion of COVID supplies in the last 2 years. Now, democracy is about accountability. So will the Leader of the House make a statement setting out who she thinks should be held accountable for this colossal, appalling and eye-watering waste of taxpayers' money?
Well, first of all, I would say to the Honourable Lady that the COVID inquiry is underway at the moment. It is obviously in determining what particular things it is going to look to. And we obviously have scrutiny in this House through select committees, Public Accounts Committee most notably, on all of these matters. What I would also say to her is that products that are bought in these circumstances do have a shelf life. And as a Member of Parliament who spent pretty much most of the first year of the pandemic every day on the phone to all colleagues, I can tell the Honourable Lady that the sentiment of this House and members in it is that we moved heaven and earth to get as much PPE as we could and to get it into the front line for NHS and care staff. And I would rather be answering questions to the Honourable Lady about value for money than apologising to her that we didn't take those actions at the time.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. A recent Freedom of Information request has revealed that in the past 7 years, Labour-run Rotherham Council has spent just £11,000 on Diddington, a town with a population of about 12,000 people. This equates to about 13 pence a person a year. Contrast this to the Conservative government, which in the budget this March awarded Diddington £12 million to rejuvenate the High Street. Does the Leader of the House agree with me that only the Conservatives can reverse the decades of Labour-led decline for Diddington, and that anyone who cares about Diddington should vote for Jules Hall, the Conservative candidate, in the upcoming Diddington Ward by-election?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman. He is right. This government is putting its money where its mouth is. We need to give communities the capital that they need to regenerate, but also attract, again, further investment in. I would say to him, with regard to Julie, that who I understand was somebody that initiated the plan to save the High Street and was a great force for good in actually securing that bid. I wish her all the best in the forthcoming election. There are other candidates available, which I'm sure will be on the BBC website.
And I assume the Honourable Gentleman did ask for a debate or a statement.
Madam Deputy, absolutely.
Good. Barry Sherman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the longest serving member on these benches, and in my 44 years I've seen some real changes here, but one that is disturbing me at the moment is the propensity for the government to put quite junior members of ministers to answer very important statements. And could we see more sign of members of the Cabinet? I don't know if they're all on holiday, but could we have more of them? But in terms of an upcoming debate, it's also the 75th anniversary, not just of the NHS, it's also the WHO. Many of the challenges we face in health will be pandemics and worldwide. Could we have a debate on how we improve the performance of the WHO? Perhaps it needed more resources, but let's not take it for granted. Please, could we look at the WHO intently?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. He will know that I take a great deal of interest in ensuring that departments, whether it be parliamentary clerks, ministers in those departments, or perm secretaries, understand what this House needs and the respect that needs to be afforded to it. What I can say from my personal experience is I know that even the most senior ministers, those in the great offices of state, are frequently here, Home Secretary being a prime example of that. But I shall make sure that on our regular training that we convey the honourable gentleman's sentiments. And again, with regard to debates, the Backbench Business Committee is just one means that the honourable gentleman has to secure debates. But I shall certainly make sure that the Secretary of State has heard his remarks today.
Fiona Bruce.
Labour-led Cheshire East Council has a proposal to close all libraries for at least 1.5 weekdays every week. In my constituency, this will affect libraries at Alsager, Sandbach, Holmes Chapel, Midwich and Congleton. Does the Leader of the House agree with me that members of Congleton Town Council and others are absolutely right to oppose this inexplicable proposal, bearing in mind its negative, indeed potentially damaging impact, not only on young people's learning, but also on my constituents, many of them the least well off, who depend upon libraries for welfare checks, bus applications, computer use for job applications, to read the local papers, and many other everyday essentials.
Once again, it is quite important to ask the Leader of the House to make it relevant to the business, rather than whether she just agrees with the comments that have been made. Leader of the House.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I will remind the Honourable Lady that it is DLUC questions on Monday, which is going to be jam-packed. But I would agree with her. I mean, I think this is a crazy solution to a problem of constrained resource. Why would you have an asset with all of those overheads just to shut it for part of the week? And I would encourage her council to be a bit more entrepreneurial, to generate some income, to work with partners, to ask for business support, and the many other things that other councils up and down the country have done to secure these vital services, including community asset transfers in some cases. I really do hope that in addition to securing a debate, asking a question on Monday, she can also get her council to buck up.
Chris Law.
Madam Deputy Speaker, wholesale energy prices for suppliers may have returned to normal, but Bonner Yarns in my constituency of Dundee have been producing specialist textiles for over 100 years and supplying some of the world's largest sporting venues was facing closure due to what looks like price gouging. Although the company changed ownership earlier this year, the already existing energy supplier Brook Green Supplies, I understand, quoted them a 400% increase without any actual increase in usage or adequate explanation. Madam Deputy Speaker, many businesses are currently being held at ransom by high energy costs. So can we have an urgent statement from the UK Government on what reforms they are considering to end this corporate daylight robbery by energy companies, which is putting businesses and communities at risk?
Well, the honourable gentleman will know that we take these types of matters very seriously. Just this week he will know, because of the Competition and Markets Authority's findings, that we are introducing a pump watch scheme, if I can use Fair Fuels terminology for it, and also ensuring that suppliers are pricing fairly, and that where the wholesale price drops, it is passed on to, in that case, motorists. So he will know we take these matters seriously. Given that the relevant department is not coming to this House until after recess, I shall make sure that they have heard what the honourable gentleman has said today. We want fairness, competition. True competition is part of that, and that is why our Prime Minister now, when he was Chancellor, commissioned work on these very such matters.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can we have a debate about Section 106 developer levies? Labour-run Kirklees Council are taking in hundreds of thousands of pounds from housing developers for local infrastructure, but local people are losing confidence in the system. They just aren't seeing this money invested in local schools, invested in local roads, and invested in local health services, actually in the communities which are being impacted by these large housing developments.
Well, my honourable friend raises a very important point, and what we need is to have transparency on this, and that's why we are introducing a new infrastructure levy through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, and that will increase transparency about what is being funded through developer contributions in line with local priorities, which should be being set by local people themselves. Again, an advert for DLUC questions on Monday, and I'm sure the honourable gentleman will be there.
Shout at staff. Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can we have a debate on the negative impacts Labour-run Bradford Council's Clean Air Zone tax is having on local businesses? Not only in Keighley, but also Shipley and indeed within Bradford City itself. But also the negative impacts it's having on local residents in villages like East Moreton, which are experiencing much higher levels of traffic congestion and speeding as a result of motorists choosing to take alternative routes to avoid Labour's ridiculous tax on hard-working people.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this important point. There are, across the country, good and sensible schemes which are tackling air pollution. The issue that so many people have with the type of scheme that the honourable gentleman's constituents are having to endure, but also most notably residents and businesses in London, is because it is just a revenue-raising exercise. It doesn't take into account someone's ability to make the transition that is being asked of them. And it is not just affecting these areas, it is affecting everyone. In my constituency, I have traders that want to come and provide services to London. There will be constituencies surrounding the honourable gentleman who will have traders and businesses that need to get into those communities, and they are now being priced out of doing that. We should be supporting people to keep more of the money that they earn, for their businesses to thrive, and we need to innovate, and that is how we're going to make this transition.
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could we have a debate in government time on a very sad record which will be broken, the highest ever number of families in homeless households in temporary accommodation in London by the end of this summer, ever. The long-term impacts on health and educational attainment of our citizens is at risk. Would she agree with me that in the current climate, with the mortgage crisis, the unaffordable rents going up by 20% in some London boroughs, and very long queues for social homes because of the lack of money from the government to build them, we do desperately need to tackle the housing crisis in London and beyond?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question. She will know that our record, although there is more to do to ensure that everyone can have a warm, secure home, and also to increase the levels of home ownership that we want to see. But she will know that our record on home building is considerably better than her party's. We want to do more. There are initiatives and pushes, as she will know, particularly in London, to build up, not out, and to increase the volume of housing stock. We must do these things. And again, she will know that there is a question session appearing on Monday where she can raise these matters, but I would also encourage her to raise it with the Labour Mayor of London.
Raymond Chisty.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the excellent prehabilitation and cancer care team at Medway Hospital have shared data with me which states that 97% of patients need prehabilitative care before intervention with regards to cancer treatments. They are currently awaiting a decision by the ICB Kent and Medway with regards to future funding. Can the Leader of the House please raise this with the Department of Health so that an urgent decision can be made? And with that being the case, can the Leader of the House please allow for a statement on the floor of the House with regards to prehabilitation and treatment with regards to cancer care?
Leader of the House.
Well, I would encourage my honourable friend to raise this matter directly with the Secretary of State on Tuesday, but he will know that the Secretary of State has also been collecting data from integrated care boards to really understand which areas people are performing well in and which areas people are behind the curve. That, I think, will be hugely helpful in ensuring that we're getting the right focus at a local level to ensuring that all of our constituents are enjoying outstanding care.
Andrew Bridgen.
Madam Deputy Speaker, evidence has now emerged from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem that the Pfizer COVID vaccine rolled out across the world was not the same, nor was it manufactured in the same way as the vaccine trialled on 44,000 volunteers and subsequently given emergency use approval. If ministers were unaware of this, then potentially the MHRA has committed a criminal act. Madam Deputy Speaker, no one could have given informed consent because the public were misled. And this also explains the huge difference between the Pfizer data and our own yellow card data with regard to adverse events. Can we have a statement from the government at their earliest convenience?
Leader of the House.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, which is appropriate for business questions, because I am here to advise honourable members on what they can do to forward the issues that are concern to them. The honourable gentleman could raise this with the relevant department on Tuesday. Of course, if he thinks that there has been any wrongdoing, he has many courses of action available to him. He can raise awareness, he can apply for debates. He was sat next to just earlier, although he's no longer in his place, the chairman of the Backbench Business Committee. He could have a word with him. He can table an EDM. He can raise it in questions on the floor of this House. He could write to the Cabinet Secretary, and I would expect him to do so on such an important matter. He could get in touch with the COVID inquiry. He could raise this in the media. He could sort of ask a select committee to look at it. He will know that on other matters, serious matters, matters have been referred to the police. But he knows all of that. He's been in this place for 13 years, and we look forward to seeing which of those actions the honourable member will take.
Ginny Crosby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UK Government is determined to level up constituencies like Unismore, and I'm delighted that Anglesey was awarded £17 million in the latest levelling up round to regenerate Holyhead. The Memorandum of Understanding asks recipients to work with DLUC and HM Government regarding levelling up branding on projects in receipt of these funds. Does the Leader of the House agree with me that the branding is an excellent opportunity for my Pride Cymru-led council to demonstrate to the good people of Anglesey the difference that UK funds are making to their everyday lives? And would she agree that we could have a debate, an important debate in government time regarding this branding?
Well, first of all, can I congratulate the Honourable Lady for getting this investment into her constituency, and not just in her question getting that on record on the floor of its House and its origins, but also doing so in front of the relevant Secretary of State. I think she's done herself proud. But I'm always trying to find positive ways forward, so perhaps I can suggest to the Honourable Lady that she goes to her local authority and suggests an alternative plaque which says regeneration of Holyhead was made possible because of UK taxpayers. And I think that's something we could all agree on.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The motherhood pay penalty means that mothers with 2 children take home 26% less income than women without children. And a report by the Fawcett Society shows that the pay penalty hits black and minoritized women the hardest, with the intersection of sexism and racism compounding disadvantage. Now, there's more than enough evidence of the need to take serious action to deal with these inequalities, for instance by making flexible work the default, specifically by means of an advertising duty, and by making ethnicity pay gap reporting mandatory for employers with more than 100 employees. So can we have a debate into these things?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I do have to correct her because the Government Equalities Office and other areas of government are doing these things. We have had pioneering work on highlighting gender pay gap. There is huge amounts of work that went on in the race disparity audit. So these things are looked at. But if she is really concerned about cost of living issues for particular households, the Scottish Government might like to consider their tax policies.
Anna.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Southend West, like all of our constituencies, has countless NHS heroes, like Tracy Reid, who this week celebrates 42 years of service as an end-of-life clinical lead, for which he's EPUT Hero of the Week. However, we also have very many unsung heroes, like Frederick England, who runs Macmillan Support at Southend Hospital. So please could we have a debate in government time on a new NHS medal to recognise long service, such as we already have for the police, for the army, for the post office and the fire service?
Leader of the House.
Well, I congratulate the Honourable Lady on mentioning a few of her unsung heroes in her constituency, and I'm sure all of us would want to echo the thanks she has given to them. She will know that the Committee on the Grant of Honours, Decorations and Medals has been the policy-making body that gives advice on these matters, and we did give the George Cross to the National Health Services of the United Kingdom in recognition of their service in response to the pandemic in particular. But I will suggest to her that she writes to that body with this very interesting proposal that she's raised today.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday it was reported that some 150 Christians have been killed in Nigeria's Plateau State in the first 3 weeks of June alone. That's 7 men, women and children each day in those 3 weeks. This week the APPG on freedom of religious belief, which I chair, released a new report on Tuesday past, the 4th of July, which highlighted the increase in violence targeting Christians and other minorities and how this disproportionately affects women and girls. And I know that the Leader of the House is tremendously interested in these matters, as I am, indeed as others are as well. Will the Leader of the House raise the recommendations in this report with the appropriate minister, please? Thank you.
Leader of the House. Can I thank the honourable gentleman again on behalf of all of us of continuing to raise these matters each week. It is very important that we send a message that our eyes are on these particular groups who are suffering terribly in particular parts of the world. We do have one more Foreign Office questions before the House rises for summer recess, and I know the honourable gentleman will need no encouragement to be there. He will be there, absolutely. And he will know as well that the Foreign Secretary launched earlier this year the International Women and Girls Strategy, gave that ongoing work an upfresh, and we will continue to do all we can to speak out for the plight of these, particularly women and girls, but all peoples who are being oppressed, and to champion their freedoms, freedom of religion and freedom of belief.
I thank the Leader of the House for answering the business questions, and the clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Supply and Appropriation, Main Estimates, Number 2 Bill, second reading. Now.
Minister to move formally. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to the general debate on building safety and social housing, and I call Secretary of State Michael Gove to move.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. 6 years on from the night of 14th June 27, we are here to remember all those affected by the fire at Grenfell Tower. 6 years on, 72 months on, 72 lives lost. And thousands more people, bereaved families and residents from the North Kensington community whose grief endures. And I know that I speak not just for me, but for right honourable and honourable members across this House when I say that those most affected by the fire are never far from our thoughts and prayers. And it's a particular honour to welcome survivors and bereaved family members to the gallery for the debate today, including representatives from Grenfell United and Grenfell Next of Kin. It takes determination and courage to come and to be counted and to remain so resolute. And I know from the Grenfell community members that I've been humbled to meet the power of their testimony, as do so many of us in this House. Each of them has their own compelling and moving story to tell, and their own harrowing and unforgettable perspective on events that night. They've all been united in their fight to uncover the truth and to bring about change. And I hope that we in government and across this House have been able to listen and to learn from them. And I want to take this opportunity, as I do at every opportunity, to apologise again for the role of the government and others in failings that allowed the horrifying events of the 14th of June 2017 to unfold. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, as you will hear today, I share their determination to see the truth uncovered, to make change happen, and to have all those responsible held to account so justice is delivered. The need for all of us in government to learn from and to never repeat the scandalous mistakes of Grenfell couldn't be more profound. I was clear, I hope, when I first became Levelling Up Secretary, that discharging my responsibilities to those most affected by this tragedy, by honouring their loved ones with a worthy legacy, was my absolute priority. And that meant putting right some of the many wrongs that the bereaved survivors and immediate community have had to face and endure. I'm pleased to be joined in this mission by my ministerial colleagues, by the Minister for Housing and Planning, but also by Baroness Scott of Bybrook, who was first appointed by my predecessor to the Independent Grenfell Recovery Task Force in the immediate aftermath of the fire. Her long experience of representing the needs of all residents as a former council leader has been invaluable, and I'm deeply grateful to Jane for her work. I'm also pleased that today the House has this opportunity both to honour the Grenfell community and to continue to hold the government to account. As I said last year, I want this debate to take place annually, so there is no let-up in the opportunity for scrutiny of this government and future government's actions. And it's vital that everyone across this House can satisfy themselves that the government is meeting its commitments and lasting change is being made. We, like all governments, should be judged on our actions, not just our words. And all actors, including this government, must take on board some quite tough lessons in order to make sure that a tragedy such as this never happens again. It's clear that the actions of many in the past fell well short of the standards that the Grenfell community, the bereaved survivors and local residents deserved. That's why, with my department, I remain wholly committed to supporting the independent Grenfell Tower inquiry, through which we may understand the truth about the circumstances leading to the tragedy and see justice delivered for the Grenfell community. That community was unforgivably and inexcusably let down. Evidence before the inquiry, reporting by distinguished journalists such as Peter Apps point out that in the months and years before the fire, people's concerns went unheard and ignored. And in the days and weeks after the fire, the institutions that were supposed to help victims were found wanting. I hope that uncovering the circumstances that led to the fire will bring at least some relief and comfort. And having concluded its oral hearings last year, Sir Martin Warburg and his inquiry team are now preparing their final report and recommendations. Also importantly, the independent Metropolitan Police investigation into potential criminality continues in parallel. It's of the utmost importance to community members that this investigation is able to operate as they seek the justice that they deserve. The government's accepted in principle all the recommendations in the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 1 report, and so far we've implemented 10 of the 15 recommendations focused on central government. So a significant amount has been done, but there is more to do. The remaining 5 recommendations are in progress, and I continue to work closely with the Home Secretary to make sure that we deliver on all of them, particularly the recommendation on mandating personal evacuation plans, or PEEPs, for disabled residents. One of the features of the Grenfell tragedy was the way in which those living with disabilities were particularly vulnerable. Yes, of course.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. As the Secretary of State has said, it's 6 years now since the Grenfell fire, but something that concerns me is that new data gathered by Inside Housing shows only a fraction of high-rise social housing blocks have been retrofitted with sprinklers or fire alarms, fewer than 1 in 5. A lack of funding is a key reason for this. So can the government really claim it's doing everything possible to prevent another Grenfell when people are still living in high-rises without these protections?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for raising it. I know that he's had a lifelong interest in social housing and cares very deeply about the fates of tenants in those conditions. I would never say that we've done everything that we should. I do believe that significant progress has been made, not least in remediating high-rise buildings and making sure that everyone who should plays their part. And I'll say a little bit more about it in a moment. But he is right to focus that when it comes to fire safety, it's not just the external cladding, which of course was the principal cause of the fire at Grenfell, but also internal safety measures that we need to look at. Has progress been fast enough? No. Does resource need to be allocated? Yes. So I do agree with him that more requires to be done. I was reflecting just before that very helpful intervention on the particular fate that disabled residents faced at Grenfell and the vital importance of making sure that we have personal emergency evacuation plans in place, and I hope to be able to update the House with the Home Secretary in due course. But as the Honourable Gentleman has pointed out, there are a broad range of issues which affect building safety overall. And of course, one of the findings of the Grenfell Tower inquiry will inevitably be a recognition of systemic failures in the way in which we dealt with building safety. Because the public, residents, and indeed the government put our faith in building and approving high-rise blocks and construction products being supplied for those high-rise blocks. We believed that the law was being followed. We believed that the right thing was being done. But this trust was misplaced and abused. Industry profits, we now know, were prioritised over safety. And the safeguards that should have been observed were flouted. We are now, with the help of all parties in this House, fixing the broken building safety system, and we're seeking redress. And I've been clear, in just one second, I've been clear that those responsible, those at the apex of the building industry, must take responsibility. As of today, a total of 49 developers, including the 10 largest house builders, have signed our developer remediation contract, and I'm grateful to them for showing such leadership. All developers who've signed the contract now have a legal duty to get on with remediation. Very happy to give way.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way, and as I'm sure he knows, the Hackett Review, one of the key recommendations was to set up the building safety regulator. So he'll understand the concern when amendments have now been put down to the Levelling Up Bill, giving the Secretary of State powers to scrap the building safety regime via statutory instrument. If the number one thing the state needs to do is keep its citizens safe, can he explain why are these amendments put down, and under what circumstances would he see using that power to get rid of this regulator without proper scrutiny in this House?
I absolutely would never do anything to undermine the position of the building safety regulator, and indeed I've been working with colleagues in DWP and the Health and Safety Executive in order to make sure that we have the right team in place, the right person as regulator, and the right powers for that regulator. And all the legislation that we're bringing forward, not just previous building safety legislation, but the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, is designed to strengthen the hand of the regulator. But I'd be delighted to talk to the Honourable Lady in greater detail outside this House in order to provide that reassurance, and happy to give way.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. He talks about the remediation of the buildings. He knows the interest that a company in Glasgow South West has. They do great work in removing cladding, etc. But they've come across the stumbling blocks with regard to the insurance companies and the insurance premiums. Could you say a bit about the discussions he's had with the insurance industry to make sure that this work's done? Thank you.
Yes, well, the Honourable Gentleman makes a very important point. In talking about the shared responsibility that so many have, I stress that government has a responsibility, the construction sector has, insurance companies certainly do. And it is the case that insurance companies, unfortunately, are charging premia which I believe are way above what they should. That is impeding the capacity of individuals to get on with their lives. It's imposing costs which are unnecessary. My colleague Lee Rowley, who is the Minister responsible for the implementation of the building safety regime, has been talking to the Association of British Insurers and to individual insurance companies and to insurance brokers in order to try to make progress. Hasn't been as much as I'd like, but again, I'll update the House in due course, as I know Lee will as well. I mentioned the case with developers, and it is the case that developers are taking responsibility for all the necessary work to address life-critical fire safety defects in buildings over 11 metres high that they either developed or refurbished in England during the 30 years before the 5th of April 2022. There are more than 1,100 buildings in scope which are unsafe, and the cost will be £2 billion. Again, I'm grateful to developers for shouldering that responsibility. Developers, of course, must also keep residents informed about the progress of these works. As I know from my own constituency, it is absolutely vital that residents are involved in that process, and I'm happy to give way.
I'd like to thank the Minister for giving way. I do recognise that the government has started to do some work, particularly on the ACM cladding, particularly over 18 metres. It has been very slow. one of the things I wanted to ask the Minister is some of the work that's being done, particularly for the 11 to 18 metres, is some distance away. It is really worrying for homeowners at the moment who are trapped in these properties. Can the Minister look at how this could be speeded? And secondly, has there been work done to look at different types of cladding? Because there are different types of cladding other than ACM cladding that are also unsafe.
Well, there are two very important points that the Honourable Lady raises. Yes, we are now moving to accelerate support for those who are living in buildings between 11 and 18 metres high, absolutely. And the cladding scheme that we're bringing forward has all the energy that Homes England, Lee Rowley and the department can deploy behind it. On her second point, of course it is the case that while ACM was responsible for this particularly horrific tragedy and also previously responsible for fires in the Gulf and elsewhere, nevertheless there are other forms of cladding that are also at risk and which we do need to and have been removing.
Will he give way?
Yes, of course.
Very grateful to him for giving way. And I also want to pay tribute to the families and the survivors who've come here today. And while he's rightly focusing on the systemic failures that led to this disaster and the responsibility of the big players, the agencies and indeed the government itself in the lead up to the disaster and indeed in the immediate aftermath, will he pay tribute to the community groups who stepped forward so impressively on the ground, including indeed some council workers, and I think of councillors like David Lindsay and others, and proper voice in the period preceding the fire, and that we should do more to engage community groups in future?
Yes, I'm so grateful to my honourable friend for making that point. One of the things that struck me about the North Kensington community and all those affected is the way in which community groups have played such an important part. So faith groups, including the local Roman Catholic, the local Anglican and the local Methodist churches, the Almanar Mosque. It's also the case that pre-existing charities like the Rugby Portobello Trust have been very energetic in providing support, but also there are a wealth of other groups, so the Lancaster West Residents Association, and of course, born out of the shadow of the tragedy, Grenfell United, Grenfell Next of Kin, they all testify to a very, very rich social fabric and to community activism of the very best kind, which I know he has championed, and I know that he knows, even though he now represents a seat in the west of England, that the work that he did with the West London Zone, which was committed to improving social mobility in that area, is an exemplar. On building safety, I must make it clear that the developers will be held to account for their actions. Those who have made these commitments, again I'm grateful, are now eligible to join our new Responsible Actors scheme, and subject to the will of Parliament, the Responsible Actors scheme will come into being this summer. And there are other levers that we are using to hold the worst actors to account over building safety, because it's not just, as I say, developers who are share in the responsibility for putting things right. We're pursuing the most egregious cases of people who have a responsibility, freeholders and others, through our new Recovery Strategy Unit, the RSU, and other means have yielded or are beginning to yield results. To date, the RSU has started legal activity against 3 significant freeholders who have responsibility for 19 buildings in order to protect residents and to ensure safety. And these include Wallace Partnership Group Limited, Grey GR Limited Partnership, a company ultimately owned by Railpen Limited. And it's vitally important that all of us recognise that when it comes to the responsibilities of pension fund trustees, who are the freehold owners in this case, that they have a responsibility not just to the beneficiaries of the pension fund, but to those who are living in the homes whose freeholds they own. We're also bringing pressure to bear, critically, on those involved in the manufacture of construction products which were there, used and abused in the run-up to the Grenfell tragedy. So 3 construction product giants, Kingspan, Arconic and Saint-Gobain, the parent of Celotex, are all coming under pressure. In the last few months, I've written to these companies, invited them to meet me to explain their plans to contribute financially to remediation works on unsafe buildings, and I've also written to their investors. I've assured those investors that the sites of my department are trained upon these manufacturers and that there will be legal and commercial consequences should they fail to make satisfactory arrangements. I believe that responsible investors can join all of us in this House in bringing pressure to bear, because their wider obligations to society and their commercial interests are one and the same. As the Honourable Lady mentioned earlier, we need to work together in order to ensure not just that the most serious safety problems are dealt with, but that all safety problems are dealt with. But it is the case that people living in high-rise buildings with the most dangerous cladding, ACM cladding, like that on Grenfell Tower, have received the support and the change needed. Some 96% of the buildings that had ACM cladding have now been made safe or have work underway, and in the social housing sector, all buildings with ACM cladding have been addressed. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, forgive me. The Building Safety Act was also, as the Honourable Lady speaking for the Liberal Democrats pointed out, given us additional powers, regulatory powers, which we shall not hesitate to use. And the new building safety regulator will be responsible for overseeing building safety in residential buildings above 18 metres, and it will take enforcement action where necessary. Building safety, of course, is at the heart of the Grenfell tragedy. But there are two other points that I want to make briefly before yielding the floor to others. One is the vital importance of making sure that all of us recall how important it is to listen to the voices of those in social housing. For too long, the voices of too many social housing tenants were ignored. People living in substandard homes told us what was wrong. They described appalling conditions. They enumerated with distressing accuracy the dangerous oversights that led them to feel unsafe in the place that they should have felt most secure. We must never let those voices go unheeded again. We, all of us, must be guided by them as we improve the living conditions and rights of social housing tenants across the United Kingdom. At last year's debate, I had just announced that the Social Housing Regulation Bill in the Queen's speech was due to be debated in both our houses. I'm pleased that we're now on the verge of royal assent. The bill codifies our commitment to transform the experiences of social housing residents, ensuring that landlords deliver the safe and decent homes that all residents should expect. And the legislation was brought forward, of course, as a direct response to concerns raised by members of the Grenfell community. But of course, as that legislation has had its passage through both our houses, we've been reminded forcibly about the need to strengthen it further. The tragic death of Abba Bishak in 2020, aged just 2, as a result of respiratory conditions generated by the grotesque circumstances in which he was being brought up by the housing association that should have attacked damp and mould far earlier. That has also led to changes to that legislation. Awab's law now requires social landlords to deal with damp and mould complaints to a strict timetable and will ensure that all tenants have the protection that they deserve. It is also the case that that bill, thanks to the work of Grenfell United and others, includes provisions to ensure the professionalisation of the housing sector, a consistent demand of the bereaved residents and survivors, and also a demand consistent with making sure that those who work in housing get the recognition and indeed the respect they deserve as they acquire that additional qualification. Yes.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to thank the Minister for giving way on that point. As we know, a lot of us MPs are getting a lot of housing cases. Today, I'm still getting housing cases where constituents are being blamed for the type of accommodation that they're living in. I have cases currently right now where constituents are being blamed for their lifestyle. It is not filtering through right now, Minister. This is a real problem, and it's important that whilst you're talking about all the things that you're achieving, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Address the Minister directly at 3 minutes. Secretary of State.
Speaker, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. Issues with damp and mould are not a consequence of lifestyle. And in fact, often when that allegation is made, there is sometimes behind it an unhappy and prejudiced attitude towards some communities and some individuals, and we need to call that out, and the Housing Ombudsman has been clear. And I should also say that I would not want to, do not believe that I should take credit for these steps. It is this House, it is everyone here that has worked together with people outside this House, Grenfell United, Awa Beshak's family, but also campaigning journalists like Daniel Hewitt and Vicky Spratt, and above all the campaigner Kwadwo Twenoboa. I think he's done far more than any minister has to make sure that we get the message on social housing. The final thing that I just wanted to cover was the particular needs of the community itself. Because, of course, the Grenfell tragedy encapsulated what had gone wrong with our building safety system and what had gone wrong with the way that we treat people in social housing. But there are real needs that the community continues to feel. And I want to reaffirm the commitment made by my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, the former Prime Minister Theresa May, in the terrible aftermath of the fire. She said that the government will be there in that community long after the cameras stop rolling. And the right honourable member for Maidenhead has taken a close personal interest in ensuring that we continue to support the community. And Baroness Scott and I will continue to work with other arms of government, the Royal Borough of Kensington-Chelsea, the NHS, the Independent Grenfell Tower Memorial Commission, in order to ensure that the community has the ongoing support that it needs through the conclusion of the inquiry and beyond. Madam Deputy Speaker, the tragedy at Grenfell Tower was one of the worst civilian tragedies in our history. And the bereaved survivors and immediate community will never forget, nor should they, nor should we. And we seek not only in this debate and in the work of government and parliament to honour the memory of those who died, but also to build a legacy in their name. Safer and greener homes, better social housing, and a lasting commitment to those affected by these terrible events. This government, this House, indeed our whole country, has a responsibility and a stake in the future of Grenfell and the community. And I know that across this House, we are pledged to remembering the lives lost, to seeking truth in their names, and we will honour them by the legacy they inspire. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered building safety and social housing. Shadow Minister Matthew Pennycook.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The fire that engulfed Grenfell Tower on the 14th of June 2017 killed 72 people. 18 were children. Many, as the Secretary of State said, were disabled. The inferno wiped out entire families, ripped others apart, and traumatised a community. The fear that Grenfell residents must have felt on that night is truly unimaginable, and those who survived will be forever scarred by what they experienced. In the days after the fire, as pictures of the smouldering and charred building were broadcast across the country and the world, there was a collective feeling across Britain that not only did we now have no choice but to confront issues that had been disregarded for far too long, but also that the sheer horror of what happened would not allow us to forget. But the truth is, Madam Deputy Speaker, that even events as traumatic as Grenfell will fade from our collective consciousness unless we work to ensure they are remembered. For that reason alone, this debate is essential. And while we lament the fact that the government did not ensure that it took place on or around the anniversary date, we nevertheless welcome the fact that we have the opportunity today to commemorate the fire and its victims, to consider again the circumstances leading up to and surrounding it, and to debate its wider ramifications. Madam Deputy Speaker, on the 14th of June this year, I took part in the Grenfell Silent Walk, as a number of other honourable members present also did. As it always is, it was a profoundly moving experience. At the end of the walk, the magnitude of the human loss is brought painfully home as the names of each and every one of these 72 men, women and children who perished in the fire are slowly and methodically called out to those assembled in stillness. But this year's walk felt different because alongside the usual grief and loss, one could sense a palpable anger among the crowd of an intensity that I've not personally witnessed before. Listening to those who spoke at the rally near the base of the tower at the end of the walk, it was clear that that anger is born not only from the ever-present knowledge that what happened could have been avoided if shortcuts were not taken, reckless and unforgivable decisions were not made, and repeated warnings were not ignored, but also from the fact that 6 years on, the prospect of justice appears so distant. On these benches, we recognise, as we always have, the need to await the final report of the Grenfell Tower inquiry. But we do understand the frustration and outrage that the community evidently feel as the years pass by without justice having been secured for their loved ones. Now, Deputy Speaker, the pursuit of justice will go on, as it must, yet the survivors, the bereaved and the wider Grenfell community, whom we on this side again pay tribute to today, have always been clear that securing wider change and a lasting legacy is equally important to them. Amid all the setbacks and frustrations they have experienced, it is important that we recognise that they have already helped change things for the better. But when it comes to decisively and markedly improving standards in social housing, and making sure that all buildings across the country are safe, there is still so much more to be done. When it comes to improving the quality of social housing, tangible progress has been made over the course of the past 12 months. We pressed for it to be strengthened further, but we worked with the government to ensure the rapid passage of the Social Housing Regulation Bill through this place, and improved as it was by a number of government concessions, we very much look forward to it receiving royal assent in the near future. As the Secretary of State will know, operationalising that bill will require a number of further measures, including determining the specific requirements that will flow from Awab's law, reviewing existing guidance on the health impacts of damp and mould in homes, and putting in place the new consumer regulation regime and updated regulatory standards. We would be grateful if the government could update the House during the course of the debate on progress on all those fronts. However, while overhauling the regulation of social housing is a necessary step to improving its quality across England, legislation alone is unlikely to be enough. We recognise that many social landlords provide good quality, safe and secure homes in which individuals and families can and do thrive. We also appreciate fully the challenging context in which social landlords have had to operate over recent years, including the significant costs of building safety remediation works. But we are convinced that many social landlords do need to ask themselves difficult but essential questions about the quality of some of the homes they provide and the service their tenants receive, and to examine afresh their culture and processes. The recently published Better Social Housing Review, overseen by the National Housing Federation and the Chartered Institute for Housing, is a welcome development in that regard, and we look forward to seeing how individual providers implement its recommendations over the coming months and years. Madam Deputy Speaker, we also recognise that progress has been made over the past year when it comes to addressing the building safety crisis, and I particularly welcome the comments the Secretary of State made in relation to product manufacturers. We would encourage him to explore and exhaust all possible options the government has to hold them to account. In the course of the past year, some leaseholders have been given legal protection. Some developers have entered into a legal agreement to remediate unsafe buildings that they've either constructed or refurbished. And some lenders have agreed to offer mortgages on blocks of flats with safety issues. But ask the hundreds of thousands of people still living in unsafe buildings across the country whether they expect the building safety crisis as it affects them to be resolved fully by this time next year or even this time 2 years hence. And the answer you will receive from the vast majority of them is a resounding no. The Secretary of State was right. All ACM issues on social housing blocks have been resolved. But we still don't know the full extent of the crisis as it affects social homes because providers are ineligible to apply for support unless their financial viability is threatened. And when it comes to the overall pace of remediation across the country, Madam Deputy Speaker, it remains glacial. Shamefully, Grenfell-style ACM cladding, which shouldn't be on any building in this country or any other country, is still present on 40 high-rise buildings in England, 6 years on. And just 37 non-ACM buildings have been fully remediated out of the total of 1,225 that made applications to the Building Safety Fund. All the evidence suggests that only a small proportion of leaseholders in unsafe buildings have seen remediation works begin, and a far larger proportion have no identified date for the commencement of works and no estimated timescale for completion, including many of those buildings covered by the developer remediation contract. As a result, despite some lenders being willing in principle to offer mortgages, 6 years on from Grenfell, the majority of leaseholders in privately owned buildings are still trapped. And within their captivity, many are being bled dry by service charges that more often than not have escalated sharply as a result of soaring buildings insurance premiums. A scandal that I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government have singularly failed to step in and decisively resolve over a period of multiple years, despite continuous pleading from honourable members from across the House. I will do.
And I apologise for not being here for the first words of the debate. Can I confirm what the honourable gentleman is saying? What leaseholders need is what social tenants have got, which is the problem needs to be identified, it needs to be fixed, and then the funding. To wait for the funding is the wrong way round.
I thank the Father of the House for that intervention. We've argued, I hope he'll accept consistently since the start of this crisis, that the government should step in and fund and then use its power to recover as we go forward, because too many leaseholders are trapped not just in context of this problem, but as he will know, from the wider inequities of the leasehold system, and we need to tackle that problem in due course too.
Will the Shadow Minister give way?
I will give way.
I'd like to thank the Shadow Minister for his thoughtful and detailed remarks. I just want to take him back to a point he made about ACM cladding. I know that survivors of the Grenfell fire and the bereaved are very keen to see the banning of ACM cladding globally. The Shadow Minister mentioned that it's there on 40 blocks in the UK as it stands. Would the Shadow Minister like to see it effectively banned globally and those 40 removed, of course, in this country as well?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. I mean, ACM, in my view, should not be on any building in England 6 years on after the fire. And it is shameful that it is Secretary of State. But I think he's absolutely right. The government should use its authority and the experience that it's gleaned over the past 6 years to make the case worldwide, I'd say, because this material should not be on any building. It is dangerous and it should never have been put up in the first place. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, while all trapped leaseholders are feeling the strain, in relative terms, some are better off than others because the government made the political choice to provide some with legal protection from the costs of historic non-cladding defects, while leaving others exposed to bills that will not only lead to financial ruin in many instances, but will have a material impact on the progress of remediation in buildings where such non-qualifying leaseholders are large in number. Even at this late stage, I urge the Secretary of State to reconsider the arbitrary division of blameless leaseholders into those who qualify for protection under the law and those who do not, as well as beseeching him to ensure government finally grip and drive from the centre an accelerated programme of remediation across the country. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, 6 years on from the horror of Grenfell, things have changed, but they have not changed anywhere near enough. If we are to ensure that everyone has a secure, decent, affordable and safe home in which to live, far more still needs to be done and done quickly. If it isn't, we will be back here again next year, marking the 7th anniversary of the fire, still bemoaning the fact that there are too many social tenants being let down, too many buildings not made safe, and the lives of too many blameless leaseholders destroyed. We owe it to the survivors, the bereaved and the wider Grenfell community, to the legacy they want to see established, to ensure that is not the case.
SNP spokesperson Chris Stevens.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and like others, our thoughts and prayers go to the Grenfell community as we remember this debate. It's worth remembering, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Grenfell fire killed 72 people due to flammable cladding, and this House remembers the lives that were lost. It's also worth remembering that during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, Madam Deputy Speaker, 72 seats were left unfilled at a street party to remind the community of the lives lost. Each place at the table was set with a name card, napkin, plate, cup and flag. As Yvette Williams, a Justice for Grenfell campaigner, said, 5 years on, after a public inquiry and millions still trapped in their homes by flammable cladding and still no justice. There have been no lessons learned and little action taken as people up and down the country enjoy street parties, as they rightly should. We want to let the powers that be know that our community will always remember the 72 who died needlessly here that night. Madam Deputy Speaker, a total of 6,247 people were referred to the dedicated NHS Grenfell Health and Wellbeing Service, of those 1,476 of which were children. As Dr Sarah Northey, who runs the therapy for children and young people at the dedicated NHS Grenfell Health and Wellbeing Service, has described the scale of trauma as unprecedented. She has said this is an unusual trauma, as it affected a whole community and is definitely ongoing. Grief doesn't just go away, but what is striking is also the strength people have in the relationships here and the connection people have. At the heart of the trauma is a shattering of safety. We have seen a lot of avoidance of things that remind children of fire. A bonfire or candles on a birthday cake can be quite triggering. Some are worried about electronics in the home and need to check things are switched off. Children are being kind of hyper-aware of safety in a way that most children don't have to be. And I hope when ministers will also tell House, as important it is that we concentrate on the building safety side of things. I hope that they will be able to tell the House that they are committed to making sure that these health and wellbeing services will still be there and maintained to help the people in Grenfell. And as the Secretary of State rightly said, there should be an annual debate to discuss these matters, not just to discuss the building health and safety, but to, I think, in order to ensure that the health and wellbeing of that community is made. And I see that the Secretary of State is nodding and agrees with that, and I thank him for that. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also want to just touch on the Scottish situation. The Scottish Government are spending every penny of consequential funding it receives on this programme of work, with a committed spend of £1.3 million. The Scottish Cladding Remediation Programme is designed to ensure there is no cost to property owners and residents for the procurement and production of a single building assessment for each building. The Scottish Government first have to carry out comprehensive and technical assessments to understand the extent of the problem. The vast majority of buildings in the initial phase of the Scottish Government's programme have secured fire engineers, and a new streamlined process for commissioning the assessments will help identify risk buildings more quickly. The safety of residents and homeowners in Scotland is of the utmost priority as we work to tackle cladding safety issues through our single building assessment, which is expanded to more than 100 buildings. The Scottish Government will create a register of buildings which will provide assurance to the public following any necessary remediation works and when they've been completed. And if experts identify an issue which needs immediate action to safeguard residents, the Scottish Government will take action and expect developers to do likewise on their buildings. This can be a complex and time-consuming programme. A number of assessments are either at final or pre-final reporting stage, with discussions on remediation underway. And I hope ministers will be able, at the conclusion of the debate, to talk about the discussions they're having with the devolved administrations, because it is about funding and Barnett consequentials. Barnett consequentials kick in when the UK Government actually spend money. So I hope that ministers will be able to update the House on the discussions they're having with the devolved administrations. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Scottish Government has and will continue to strengthen the building standards system in Scotland, with the Building Standards Futures Board established to undertake a programme of work to strengthen the system. The Scottish Government has legislated to improve fire safety by banning developers from using combustible cladding on residential and other high-risk buildings above 11 metres. Scotland was the first part of the UK to ban the highest risk metal composite cladding material from any new building of any height. Since 2005, new cladding systems on high-rise block flats have either had to use non-combustible materials or pass a large-scale fire test. The building standards legislation removes the option of a fire test, completely prohibiting such materials from use in domestic and other high-rise buildings, such as care homes and hospitals, above 11 metres. In October 2019, the Scottish Government strengthened guidance in relation to combustible cladding, means of escape and measures to assist the fire service. And these regulations were passed unanimously by the Scottish Parliament to protect lives and property following the tragic Grenfell Tower fire. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have outlined some of the work that's been done in Scotland, and on behalf of the Scottish National Party, I just want to emphasise that our thoughts, prayers and love go out to the Grenfell community.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I agree with the Secretary of State that we should have a Grenfell debate annually. I think it would be better to have it on, or as near as possible, to the anniversary date, and it's somewhat disrespectful to have waited nearly a month to have it this year. I also am sure that the silent walks will continue, and I always try to attend at least on the anniversary when that happens. And I've noticed over those 6 years that the mood has changed. It's changed from grief to frustration at seeing lack of progress on all sides, whether that's by the government or the inquiry, to a real anger that was there. The Shadow Minister was there, and he'll, I'm sure, agree with me on that point. And so I don't recognise a lot of what the Secretary of State said in terms of what is happening. What seems to be happening is that every year there are more issues, more complex issues, and where there has been some degree of resolution, there have been more questions raised and more problems to resolve. Problems around the causes of fires, problems around the spread of fire, and that to a large extent that is to do with cladding and not just ACM cladding, but there are many other reasons why fire spreads through particularly high-rise buildings. And I know that the families want to see a ban on ACM cladding in particular, not only completely in this country from all buildings, but internationally as well. And I hope that the government will campaign for that to happen, because it's not only in the UK that tragic fires such as Grenfell have happened. There are huge issues around design of new buildings, and that is evolving every time, as we'll see over the two staircase issue. But also in terms of remediation of, to some extent it's easy to set new building standards for new buildings. It's not easy, but it can be done. But we are lagging behind substantially in doing remedial work to existing buildings. And a lot of this comes down to questions of finance. And that's finance not just for individuals in the case of leaseholders who under certain circumstances will still have to pay out large sums of money, or where the money is not forthcoming up front, but also for social tenants, because social landlords are not getting the same degree of financial support that leaseholders are getting. And there are real competing priorities for social landlords as to what to spend their money on. I'm not going to deal with, I don't want to take the time to deal with all those issues. I'd like to, but I'm just going to deal with three of those issues in more detail. The first is about causes of fires. The cause of Grenfell is one of these, which is a crimp, which is a very small piece of wiring, which costs a few pence. And I'm very grateful to, I'm not an expert in these matters, and I'm sure people will guess, to the chairman of the Hammersmith Society, Richard Farthing, who had a background in electrical and electronic manufacturing, who sent me the expert report in relation to the cause of Grenfell fire, and I'm not going to go through all the technical details. The very short conclusion says a probable cause of the fire is a poor crimp connection, which is an overheated wire connector within the compressor relay compartment for the freezer Hotpoint model FF175BP from flat 16. It's as simple as that, Madam Deputy Speaker. A little component costing a matter of pennies, which either wasn't fitted properly, wasn't manufactured properly, which caused a fire which led to the deaths of 72 people. Now, of course, there were many other issues of causation in Grenfell and elsewhere, but what I think that draws attention to is the lack of quality control in manufacturing processes. A second issue, and one that I'm encountering every month, not a month goes by without I hear about, usually in a social housing block of flats in my constituency, fires caused by lithium batteries. When I say fires, these are usually explosions. This is an extraordinary problem that the London Fire Brigade, and I'm sure fire brigades around the country are very much aware of. I had one a couple of weeks ago. 3 people were taken to hospital after a fire broke out in a flat in West Kensington due to a converted e-bike catching fire. So what happens is that people buy a bike, they want to convert it to an e-bike, they buy a kit, they buy a battery. A lot of these things are bought second-hand, they're cheap, faulty manufacture, they overheat, and they literally explode. If you don't believe me, go and look at the London Fire Brigade's Twitter feed, and you'll see explosions which completely engulf a room of a flat, and sometimes the whole flat, within seconds. And if compartmentalisation works, i.e. because of the construction, because of the doors and because of the walls, the fire is kept within that flat, and if the occupants of that flat escape, then there may be no serious injuries. But if that doesn't happen, and if fires spread, as they can quite easily, then it is almost impossible to contain a fire like that in that way. This is a lack of regulation. Why are we allowing kits like this to be sold? Why are we allowing people to use them within high-rise buildings in that way? There will be, as I say, probably once a month I go and view the site of a fire caused by exactly that reason somewhere in my constituency, and it's only a matter of time before there are more fatalities. There have been fatalities through lithium batteries in that way. And the third issue on calls I would raise, again, it's a personal experience. The year before Grenfell, high-rise block of flats, Shepherd's Court on Shepherd's Bush Green, where a faulty tumble dryer caught fire, destroyed the flat. There were hundreds of thousands of these manufactured, mainly by a large company called Whirlpool, Hot Point, Indesit, cheaply made, cheap to buy, often sold second-hand, which are causing hundreds, if not thousands, of fires across the country. That is a lack of manufacturing or design prowess. So whether it's the crimp, whether it's quality control, whether it's the batteries, whether it's lack of regulation, whether it's lack of design, there is a crisis across the manufacturing design sector. I commend to the Secretary of State a newly published book by Professor Shane Ewan of Leeds Beckett University. It's called Before Grenfell, Fire, Safety and Deregulation in 20th Century Britain. And what it says is the Grenfell Tower fire was a dark disaster foretold, the culmination of successive decades of deregulation, corporate greed and institutional failure to learn from the lessons of past multiple fatality fires. That's a very good read, I recommend to the Secretary of State, but it's indicative of that this is a crisis that didn't begin, certainly doesn't end with Grenfell. It's been going on a long time, and it's a result of either deliberate government policy or government neglect to take care of these issues. The second issue I wanted to raise was around design, and there I'm very grateful, as is often the case, to the Royal Institute of British Architects, who've been pushing and pushing around the issue of both design and remedial works to high-rise building. And their particular ask at present is that the trigger point for a second staircase, I think people are familiar with the issue around having at least 2 staircases. I mean, extraordinarily, hitherto, whereas in non-residential buildings, you have to have a second staircase if it's over 11 metres. In a residential building, it can be as tall as you like. And I know that because just literally overlooking my constituency in North Acton is a 50-plus storey block of flats newly constructed, which has 1 staircase in it. I'm pleased to say, due to actions of the Mayor of London, that the further blocks of flats of that height, or certainly above 30 metres, that are now being constructed are being required, or seeking planning permission, are being required to go back and put in a second staircase. But in REBA's submission, and they are experts clearly in this field, that should apply to any residential building over 18 metres, and I would like to see the government adopt that. When it comes to refurbishment, it may be difficult to put in a second staircase, and there the ask is that evacuation lifts, sprinklers and centrally addressable fire alarm systems are put in. Now, these don't have to be fire alarms which any member, any resident can activate, but certainly, because increasingly, and in the wake of the Grenfell tragedy, the stay-put policy doesn't work. I understand why the stay-put policy is maintained, and it does work in many cases, but it doesn't work if residents completely understandably fear for their lives and evacuate the building. And if a decision is made to evacuate a building, there has to be a way of telling people in that building. So alarm systems which are controllable, at least by the fire service, are an important part of that equation. And I cannot for the life of me think why we are not retrofitting sprinklers into high-rise buildings. They will stop 99% of fires, and many, many tragedies could be avoided if that were the case, and if that happened. The final point, Mr. Speaker, that I wanted to deal with is the consequence, and I know that this debate is partly about social housing more generally, but I'm not sure that we have time to go into all the aspects of that. But certainly I'd like to address the point where there's a crossover between fire safety and social housing providers and the pressures on their resources. And I was drawn to do this by reading what I think was a quite extraordinary interview that the Housing Minister gave to Inside Housing a couple of days ago. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs from it. When asked what housing associations should prioritise without additional funding from government and facing pressure to build retrofit stock and meet building safety and historic disrepair costs, Ms Clay, the Housing Minister, replied, "It's up to them." I mean, that shows an absolute tin ear to the pressures that are on social landlords at the moment. They want to develop new stock, then again, completely contrary to what the Housing Minister said in that interview, that the number of social rented homes is appallingly low by this government. It was 7,644 last year. She said in the same interview, we delivered more social rented homes in this government than under the last Labour government, when in fact these facts are easily discoverable. The current government has built less than half the number built by the previous Labour government. But that's only one aspect of the crisis in social housing. We've heard about damp and mould and disrepair. That needs to be dealt with. Retrofitting needs to be dealt with. That has a cost of about 23 billion, I think, as well as building safety, which is what we're talking about today. And why are social housing landlords in such a plight? The answer is that they lost 60% of social housing grant under the austerity government, and due to rent controls and other matters, they are unable to come up with the resources that they need. It is so bad, in fact, that for those particularly smaller associations are either going under or they are having to merge into much larger associations. The whole sector is being distorted by the financial pressures. So in the case of the G15, i.e. the very big landlords, what they say is that out of the £6 billion they will need to pay for remedial work due to fire safety measures, they will have to find £4 billion themselves. When I say for themselves, I mean their tenants and their leaseholders will have to find that money, because there's no other source of money that they readily have. But other associations, I'm encountering this with Shepherd's Bush Housing, very formerly well-respected local medium-sized housing association that has just had to be taken over by Guinness, much larger association, because it simply cannot financially survive with all the pressures that are on this. So this is an existential threat to the social housing market. It was previous Conservative governments who decided to move from council housing to housing associations in a big way. The government will have to rethink where it is on those issues, because it is no longer sustainable for housing associations with the amount of financial support they have to be able to go forward in that way. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd ask, I don't know with the housing, sorry, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd ask if the Housing Minister is going to wind up later that perhaps she corrects some of the errors that she made in that interview, but perhaps also that she addresses slightly more listening ear, if I can put it that way, what she has said about social landlords. Social landlords are there to perform an extremely important function. I heard everything the Secretary of State said about that, but the rhetoric is all very well and good. The actuality out there is that tenants are living in poor condition, that people are in temporary accommodation. We have the highest levels of temporary accommodation, I think, that we've ever had, because there is not decent social housing being built and maintained in this country. That is what tenants and leaseholders are looking for, not for warm words and empty rhetoric.
Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We're 6 years on from the Grenfell tragedy, and I welcome this debate. No amount of words and speeches can remove the grief and pain inflicted on families and friends of those lost to the fire. 72 lives. We will never forget. The scars will be with the community and with our nation for generations to come. I pay tribute to the families, to the survivors, to the community, to Grenfell United, for their voice and for campaigning so consistently and constantly, despite their own grief, for change, for transparency, for justice. Lessons have not been learnt. and countless people still live in buildings with hazardous cladding. And while I welcome the Building Safety Act and its good intentions, progress has just been too painfully slow. During COVID, we saw how fast government can move when it needed to. And it's such a stark contrast with the slow movement of pace of change, the Building Safety Fund taking so long to be set up, not even accounting for the number of people, not knowing how many people were affected, how many blocks, taking so long to have registration and then having to be extended and still not providing huge amounts of money to developers, but also being so slow about bringing developers to the table. It's their faults, it's their mistakes, it's their errors, but it's people who are paying the price. For over 3 years since I was elected, I've been supporting thousands of constituents in Putney and Roehampton and Southfields in 30 blocks with unsafe cladding. Only one, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of those blocks have had their cladding fully removed yet. The scaffolding went up, it was up for quite a long time, it's been removed, their cladding they're now in safe buildings, but there's all of those other blocks, they're still either with the cladding on them, untouched, and they don't know when it will be removed. A couple have got the scaffolding up and it's being removed. But why, 6 years on, has there been so little work? And I speak to constituents constantly who are furious that their cladding has still not been removed. And this reflects the situation up and down the country. Just this week, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I had a meeting with residents, developers and managing agents of one of those developments. The residents were asking, is our building safe? And all the developers could say was, well, it's not safe. That's not good enough if you're living in that building, worried about what will happen that night. So much money has been spent on waking watch that so many residents call sleeping watch that really hasn't worked. Was it necessary? And in that meeting this week, I heard from one person who said that she couldn't contract her mortgage, and so therefore her mortgage costs were going up by £2,000 a month because of the building safety concerns from lenders. And from another who's had to borrow from friends and family because he also could not renegotiate his mortgage because of those concerns. They could not be given a comfort letter by the developer, who is one of those who signed the developer's pledge, but the developer could not guarantee that that work would be done to a high enough extent for mortgage lenders. We are still far away from people not living with the mental distress of living in what could be unsafe homes, but also not being able to let them to move on with their lives, to have a normal life, despite spending so much money on being able to get a home. And the big question they have for the developers, when will they even start the work for my development, and then when will it finish? When will this be over, is what they are asking. And so I come to talk about all of the actions the government has taken. But the trouble is, with every action the government taken and every question they eventually answer, it leaves about 2 more unanswered. And it's not acceptable that after all these years, I still have to keep coming back to the chamber with many other members, such as the member for Hammersmith, who's done so much to campaign on this issue. So what will happen to the vast majority of people living in social housing who've still not had their sprinklers retrofitted in their blocks? As Inside Housing has reported, fewer than 20% of high-rise social housing blocks have been fitted with sprinklers and only 12% with fire alarms. Instead, there needs to be work, block by block, with the residents of those blocks as to what needs to happen to keep them safe. Also, what will happen to the 140,000 leaseholders in England who are living in mid-rise buildings with life safety fire risks? There's been no update about the Medium Rise Remediation Fund since the pilot scheme was launched for only 60 blocks. What will happen to the unknown numbers of people who live in buildings under 11 metres with lethal cladding still on them, which likely house disabled residents, not to mention the unresolved issues these leaseholders have had with their EWS1 forms? And what will happen to leaseholders who have non-cladding defects but cannot afford the 15,000 spending cap in London or the 10,000 spending cap outside London? What will happen to those people living in almost 12,000 buildings with non-ACM flammable cladding? Why did the government water down the personal emergency evacuation plans for disabled people and go against the recommendations of the inquiry? And I'm glad that those personal emergency evacuation plans were mentioned by the Secretary of State, but there are so many more questions about when this will be actioned. And will the Minister enact the FCA's recommendations regarding spiralling insurance costs, also mentioned already in this debate, and a huge issue for many of my constituents? Many leaseholders are suffering and even going bankrupt, who are facing increases of over 500% on their insurance costs. What will happen to these people? Will they be forgotten, or does the government have a plan? Without robust and swift enforcement, the Building Safety Act is toothless. So will the Secretary of State say why a deadline was not put in place for when developers have to remove their cladding by, rather than the vague ask of as soon as reasonably practical? And if there is any plan to have a deadline, will those developers that have signed the pledge, which is welcome, be given a final deadline? Will residents know when they are likely to be out of the nightmare that they're facing? Because developers just seem to be dragging their feet while costs are rising while this is going on. The Secretary of State mentioned a legal duty on developers who signed the pledge to get on with remediation. It would be far better if that getting on with it was given an actual date which would focus their minds and help release so much of the concern and worry going on, and also hope to bring down insurance costs, and also hope to provide the comfort that mortgage lenders say that they need. The department has only shared details on threatening to take one developer to court if they do not agree to remediation works. I think the Secretary of State that said that maybe there were 2 more in process as well. But if it's 1 or 3, that is such a small number. What serious consequences are being currently taken on the countless other developers who've refused to sign the remediation contract or who have delayed works? And can the Minister state how often the building safety regulator will call in the accountable person and what the enforcement will be? As the Secretary of State said, Kingspan, Arconic and Saint-Gobain, the manufacturers whose cladding was installed in Grenfell Tower, is still going on many other buildings. And I'm glad that action is being taken, but they have still not paid a single penny towards remediation costs. As their profits soar, taxpayers are footing the bill of their negligence to the tune of £5 billion. Enforcement needs to be more than just a letter asking them to pay. Where is the accountability? What is the hold-up? Where is the justice? I'm also glad that in this debate so far, the voice of social housing tenants has been talked about, because that is at the heart of this issue, including for temporary accommodation tenants who often have very, very little voice. They don't know how long they'll be placed for. They don't know where to go to have their say. And often there is not the additional work done by councils to enable them to have a voice. And yet they may be raising the very issues, the equivalent of those that were being raised by Grenfell residents before the tragedy. Their voice needs to be heard. Government support and rewarding those councils who do give their social housing tenants, including temporary accommodation tenants, a voice which leads to actual change should be built into the system. It does take work, it does take additional work, it does take additional support for those tenants, because it's hard to know for them where to have their voice, but they do need to be listened to. And if that lesson from Grenfell is not learnt, then we may see more tragedies which could be stopped. Grenfell is not an isolated incident, but a result of decades of unfettered deregulation of our safety. Our hospitals are crumbling, our homes riddled with toxic mould and lethal cladding. 1/5 of all firefighters have been axed, and a year before Grenfell, the Conservatives voted against making homes fit for human habitation. The truth is, it took tragedies of Grenfell and of baby Owab's death from mould for the government to even think about improving safety standards. And previously I've called for a minister for mould because of so many cases that I know of families where their health is being put at so much at risk from the mould they suffer in their homes. But the pace and scope of action has been woefully inadequate, and constantly there's very little to prevent another tragedy happening again. This terrifies me. Mr Deputy Speaker, my constituents are exhausted. Campaigners on cladding are exhausted. I'm exhausted. Grenfell United are continuing on bravely, but their justice needs to be seen. The legacy of Grenfell, of the 72 tragedies of death of wonderful lives, must be justice and certainty that this will never happen again. So how has this not been sorted out 6 years on? It will go down as in history as one of the great failings of this government. All my constituents want is to live in a home that's safe, to buy a home that they know is safe, to be able to sell their home if they need to, and not to have to pay for the mistakes of others. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, my final question to the Minister is this. Is this too much to ask? Thank you.
We're just about to come to the wind-ups, and following the conclusion of this debate, there will be a statement by the Foreign Secretary on Iran, so any members wishing to take part in that statement should make their way to the chamber now. Wind-ups, Paula Barker.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I associate myself with the comments of the Secretary of State in welcoming the families, friends and survivors of the Grenfell tragedy who are in the public gallery today. It's a privilege to be able to respond to this debate on behalf of His Majesty's opposition. And as has already been said, these benches were disappointed that no time was afforded for a debate around the anniversary of the Grenfell tragedy back in June. I want to thank all honourable and right honourable members who have contributed to this important debate this afternoon. We have heard several excellent speeches dealing both with the circumstances leading up to and surrounding the Grenfell fire and its wider ramifications. Ramifications being the trauma that survivors live with each and every day, and so too for the families and friends of the victims and for those who reside in the wider community. In one of the richest boroughs of our capital, what the Grenfell fire shone a light on in this country was rampant and unchecked inequality. Alongside this, a housing crisis which to this day remains unaddressed, with too many of our people in homes that are uninhabitable and dangerous. And lest we forget those still on social housing waiting lists, waiting for a place to call their own. In the aftermath of tragedy and the loss of human life, we can only begin to remedy the sense of loss, of human suffering with accountability, truth and justice. Most importantly, vowing never again to bear witness to the repeat of the events that unfolded on the 14th of June 2017. Vowing never again to lose a 2-year-old boy like Awab Ishak to the scourge of damp and mould because the social housing provider would not act on the complaints from his family. The Honourable Member for Glasgow South West was right when he said the scale of trauma from Grenfell is unprecedented. He was also right when he spoke about the need for health and well-being services being maintained. The Honourable Member for Hammersmith spoke movingly about the important issue of social landlords not receiving the same amount of support as leaseholders, and in his usual knowledgeable fashion spoke about the crisis across the design sector and lack of regulation and the financial pressures on social landlords being an existential threat were posed with. I welcome the contribution from my honourable friend, the member for Putney, in particular when she spoke of how fast the government moved during the COVID crisis compared to the slowness of progress in this area and the many unanswered questions. She also spoke about the need to bring down insurance costs and the assurances mortgage lenders are requiring. And I think it was a poignant moment when she spoke about the need for those in temporary accommodation to have a voice. All made earnest contributions to this debate, and I thank them for that, because after all, these matters are too important, too central to human dignity, not to be afforded time in this place or indeed the corridors of power in Whitehall. The community of Grenfell need answers. They deserve answers. And unlike my honourable friend, the member for Greenwich and Woolwich, I was unable to be at the recent Grenfell walk, but I do echo his words when he said that there was a real sense of anger and frustration this year. We know that at the end of the walk, the scale of human loss is brought painfully home as the names of each one of the 72 men, women and children who perished are called out to those who are present. And of course, we await the outcome of the Grenfell inquiry as we must, but I hear those cries of vexation, those calls for justice. We on these benches eagerly anticipate the contents of the inquiry's final report, with our institutions acting on its recommendations and delivering those three key tenets the community expects: accountability, truth and justice. When it comes to decisively and markedly improving standards in social housing and making sure that all buildings are safe, there is still much to be done. As has been stated, progress has been made over the past 12 months in respect of improving the quality of social housing. On this side, we wanted the bill to be strengthened further, but worked with the government to ensure the rapid passage of the Social Housing Regulation Bill through this place. What happens next will be pivotal to cementing the difference the legislation should make. The government has that responsibility and the social housing sector bear that responsibility too. The work undertaken by the National Housing Federation and the Chartered Institute for Housing shone a spotlight on this through their report, The Better Social Housing Review. The sector must act swiftly on the report's 7 recommendations, not least the first recommendation within it. Every housing association and the sector should refocus on their core purpose and deliver against it. On other areas, particularly building safety, the opposition recognises progress has been made, but it remains too slow for far too many. Mr Deputy Speaker, as has been stated here today, some leaseholders have been given legal protection. Some developers have entered into a legal agreement to remediate unsafe buildings that they either constructed or refurbished, and a small number of lenders have agreed to offer mortgages on blocks with safety issues. But ultimately, this is entirely inadequate. Remediation work has been painstaking, laborious, and has not even begun in too many instances. Walk around any of our major cities with high-rise blocks over the last few years and you will see shells of apartment blocks to this day. The cladding was quick to be removed, but what now for the people and families at the heart of this story? Evidence suggests that only a small proportion of leaseholders in unsafe buildings have seen remediation works begin. A far larger proportion have no identified date for the commencement of works, no estimated timescale for completion. Our people deserve better. In finishing, Mr Deputy Speaker, the government has not finished the job and we would urge the benches opposite to deliver the change many are still crying out for. They must step up and look at this entire agenda in the round. The Fire Brigades Union are right when they condemn the government for the fact that in England there are currently fewer fire safety inspectors competent to carry out audits and to serve enforcement notices than in the year after the Grenfell Tower fire. Why is that? I ask them to also heed the calls of the Local Government Association, who are saying very clearly that councils and fire and rescue services need clarity on what is expected of them as regulators alongside the building safety regulator. A significant amount of secondary legislation still needs to be approved by Parliament to implement the new building safety regime. And of course, effective delivery of the new building safety regime is dependent on adequate resource for both councils and fire and rescue services. And so I would welcome updates from the government benches on that. Mr Deputy Speaker, good quality and safe homes are the bedrock of human dignity. Housing must never take life. Rather, it should preserve the sanctity of it. Our people should be allowed to grow, flourish, and live a life well lived. For too long, the opposite has been the case.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it is a pleasure to conclude this debate on behalf of the Government. 6 years on, and as the powerful and moving contributions to today's debate illustrate, the still unimaginable events of the 14th of June 2017 continue to demand searching answers for us as a country, who we are and who we aspire to be. They reaffirm the unshakable commitment across this House to those most affected, to providing long-term support for recovery and the rebuilding of shattered lives, and to providing a legacy worthy of the 72 men, women and children who lost their lives. We honour their memory today and the courage and dignity of the bereaved, the survivors, the Grenfell community, who I am pleased to see represented here today, and it was a privilege and a humbling experience, Mr Deputy Speaker, to have a conversation with a few of them before I came to the floor of the House. Their quest for truth, justice and campaigning to reform systems that so grievously failed them in the interests of others is humbling and inspiring in equal measure. As we've heard, the issues raised by the Grenfell Tower community had been present for many years. Their calls for change went unanswered and concerns were ignored. They were failed by the institutions and mechanisms developed to support and protect them. As the Secretary of State has said, we are determined to learn from the past so that no community ever again suffers as they have done. More than anything, that must mean people being safe in their homes. And as the Minister responsible for housing, I am aware of the heavy debt we owe the Grenfell community. Over the past year, this has involved making homes with the most dangerous cladding safer, protecting leaseholders from unfair and punitive remediation costs, getting those responsible to face up to their financial and moral responsibilities, and fundamentally overhauling and strengthening the entire building safety system. On social housing too, the Grenfell community has rightly kept up the pressure for my department to make sure that we never again ignore the voices of people living in social housing, and that we make sure that it provides the safe, decent homes and respectful, good quality services that they expect and deserve. Our Bishak's tragic death underlined the urgency of this work, which we're taking forward through the Social Housing Regulation Bill, amended to include Awab's law, new requirements for social landlords to address hazards such as damp and mould within a fixed time frame. There is, of course, much more to do, and I do not underestimate the toll that 6 long years of waiting for the truth and justice to be done has taken on the people of North Kensington. Like them, we keenly await the publication of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry's final report, having already begun implementing recommendations from the Phase 1 report and the outcome of the ongoing Met Police investigation. And we look forward to seeing a fitting and lasting memorial ultimately delivered at the Grenfell Tower site through the Grenfell Tower Memorial Commission, working in partnership with the community. And I join the Secretary of State in paying tribute to the Commission's work. But I know that beyond truth and justice, the greatest legacy we can deliver is a continued commitment to listening, learning and acting to securing a better future for all, a profound commitment that I know is shared across this House. I will now turn, if I may, Mr Speaker, to some of the points raised by honourable members in the debate today, and I thank all of them for their contributions. We've heard contributions from the honourable member for Hammersmith, the SNP frontbench spokesperson, and the honourable lady for Putney, as well, of course, as the 2 frontbench spokespeople. On the issue of sprinklers, Mr Deputy Speaker, we recognise that they could play a greater role, and therefore we lowered the threshold for the provision of sprinkler systems in new blocks of flats from 30 metres to 11 metres in 2020, following a consultation on sprinklers and fire safety measures through changes to approved Document B. They are only one of a range of measures that can be provided in buildings, and building owners are already bound by a clear obligation to make sure that existing buildings have a suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment in place. Retrofitting sprinklers is not always the right option. Other fire safety measures could be taken which may be more appropriate for an individual building, such as measures recommended by Phase 1 of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry. I was asked, Mr Deputy Speaker, about how people living in buildings under 11 metres can be helped when they face expensive bills for remediation. It is the ultimate responsibility of building owners to ensure that residential buildings of all heights are safe, and the consensus is that the level of risk tallies with the height of buildings. The risk to life is usually lower in buildings under 11 metres in height, and they are very unlikely to need costly remediation to make them safe. Indeed, a fire risk appraisal of external walls conducted in accordance with the PAS 9980 principles will often find that lower cost mitigations are more appropriate in low-rise buildings. Nevertheless, my department is committed to looking at buildings under 11 metres where remediation costs are involved on a case-by-case basis, and we think this is the right approach. I was asked about ACM cladding. We have banned ACM cladding on all new builds. At the end of May 2023, 96% of all unidentified high-rise residential and publicly owned buildings in England had either completed or started work to remove and replace unsafe cladding. And 450 buildings, that's 92% of those buildings, no longer have unsafe ACM, and 84% of buildings have completed ACM remediation work. But we continue to keep up the pressure to ensure that that job is finished. I was asked to set out more detail on the... yes, I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I would just like to ask if there would be a date set on a date by which you'd like to get to, the Minister would like to get to 100% of removal of ACM cladding.
I thank the Honourable Ledger. Of course, we would all like to see that happen much more quickly, and that is why we're continuing with the legislative measures that we set out, including the Building Safety Act and all the other work that goes behind that, as the Secretary of State set out in his opening remarks. In terms of the social housing regulation that I was asked about, the direction of travel is clear. Residents have spoken and reform is coming to the social housing sector. We are committed to implementing the new regulatory regime allowed by the bill, and I thank the members of the opposition for assisting us with passing that bill through the House. The new regime will be implemented in 2024. The Secretary of State will consult on any directions to the regulator, and the regulator will need to consult then on its proposed consumer standards. But this bill is just part of a wider programme of work to drive up the quality of social housing and reduce the number of non-decent rented homes by 50% by 2030. That includes tougher regulation and a strengthened housing ombudsman service, a review of the decent home standards, and providing residents with more performance information. Mr Speaker, 72 months since the Grenfell community lost 72 family members, friends and neighbours. The enormity of what happened that night in June 2017 remains inescapable. Those who never made it out of the tower paid with their lives for collective failings, including on the part of government, for which we have apologised for, in the homes where they should have been most safe. 6 years on, those left behind continue to wait for answers, and for those responsible to be held to account, not just today but every day, as they count the cost of precious lives cut short. 6 years of missing seeing loved ones grow up or grow old, missed life milestones, meals unshared, ordinary everyday memories unmade. No apologies, no words are enough to right these wrongs. As the Secretary of State said, we will be judged not on our words but our actions. Actions to make homes safer and greener, to improve social housing and amplify the voices of residents, to make sure that those responsible step up or face the consequences, to provide long-term support for the Grenfell community for as long as it takes, to learn from the past, get to the truth, to see justice done, to ensure that everyone in our society has a safe, secure place to live which they're truly proud to call home. Let that be Grenfell's abiding legacy.
Yeah. The question is that this House has considered building safety and social housing. As may I say aye? Aye. I think no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to a statement on Iran, and I call the Foreign Secretary.
Thank you. With permission, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'll make a statement to the House on the threat that Iran poses to the United Kingdom and the actions that His Majesty's government is taking to counter them. Since protests began in Iran in September of last year, the Iranian regime has dramatically increased its attempts to silence dissent, which has never been confined to the Iranian territory. While our police, intelligence and security agencies have been confronting these threats for many years, their seriousness and intensity has increased in recent months. In the last 18 months, there have been at least 15 credible threats to kill or kidnap British nationals and others living in the UK by the Iranian regime. And we have evidence that Farsi language media outlets operating out of the United Kingdom and the individuals who work for them have also been targeted. One such company, Iran International. As my right honourable friend, the Security Minister, told the House on the 20th of February, Iran International's employees have been threatened with kidnap, threatened with murder, and they have also been subject to a debilitating campaign of aggressive online harassment. Such threats are a direct attack on press and media freedom, and a direct attack on public safety. This government will never tolerate such threats on British soil or on the territory of our friends and our allies. We know from working closely with our international partners that these Iranian menaces extend beyond the UK to the rest of Europe and the wider world. In March of this year, an Iranian orchestrated plot was stopped in Athens. We've seen similar attempts in the United States of America, in Turkey, in France, and in Denmark. Such brazen activity is unacceptable. These actions demonstrate an Iranian regime These actions demonstrate the Iranian regime's increasing desperation in the face of its unpopularity at home and its isolation abroad. Now, the first duty of His Majesty's government is to protect the British people and those who have made their home here in the United Kingdom. And whenever it is necessary, the government will not hesitate to defend the freedoms of the press. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, leads our work on countering Iranian state threats. Our police, our security and intelligence agencies are working together around the clock to identify, to deter and to prevent Iranian threats to our national security. And my right honourable friend, the Security Minister, leads the work to protect democracy and the integrity of our democracy from foreign interference through the government's Defending Democracy Task Force. The Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office leads our work on sanctions, and we've already designated more than 350 individuals and organisations linked to the Iranian regime, covering their military, security and judiciary. And we have sanctioned the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in its entirety. And our diplomatic network is coordinating with our friends and allies around the world to reinforce our response, including the United States of America, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the European Union. The cowardly attacks planned by the Iranian regime on British soil violate the most elementary rules of diplomatic relations between states. I have twice summoned Iran's most senior diplomat in London to explain his government's activities, most recently following Iran International's decision to temporarily relocate their broadcasting services. It is intolerable that any media outlet should be forced to leave the United Kingdom because of the Iranian regime and its threats to kidnap or murder their journalists. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have no doubt that every part of this House will share my outrage. And there is clear evidence that the Iranian regime continues to prepare operations against individuals in Europe and beyond. We have made representations to the Iranian Foreign Ministry. We emphasise in no uncertain terms our determination to pursue any Iranian agent who would harm the UK or our allies. We will also continue to work with our international partners to identify, to expose and to counter threats made against us. But the UK is clear that we need to go further. So today, I am announcing to the House further measures. They constitute a toolkit that I would prefer not to use. But the decision on whether I do so or whether I do not is firmly in the hands of the Iranian regime itself. Turning to the measures, first, we will establish a new Iran sanctions regime. This will be the first wholly geographic autonomous sanctions regime that the UK has created since leaving the European Union. It will give us new and enhanced powers to counter Iran's hostile and destabilising activities in the UK and around the world, allowing us to impose asset freezes and travel bans on more of Iran's decision makers and those doing its bidding. In particular, we will have broader powers to target those involved in the regime's efforts to undermine peace, stability and security in the region and internationally, to address those who proliferate arms or weapons technology from Iran, those who undermine democracy, undermine the respect for the rule of law and undermine good governance, and those who carry out other hostile activities towards the UK and our partners, including threats to our people, property or national security. We expect to bring the necessary legislation to Parliament later on this year. Secondly, I can tell the House that today we have designated a further 13 individuals and entities responsible for serious human rights violations inside Iran. This package of sanctions includes 5 senior officials from Iran's notorious prison system, which is rife with torture and abuse of prisoners. It includes further measures targeting the Supreme Council of the Cultural Revolution as the organisation that enforces social and cultural norms that oppress Iranian citizens themselves. And we target 6 key actors responsible for suppressing freedom of expression online, including the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Cyber Defence Command and the Supreme Council for Cyberspace. Mr. Deputy Speaker, our actions are a direct response to the escalation of Iran's reprehensible behaviour in the UK. We are not seeking to escalate. Our aim is to prevent and deter hostile Iranian activity on British soil, as well as on the territory of our partners and allies. Let us remind ourselves, Iran is selling drones to Russia. They are attacking their neighbours. They even attack their own people when they stand up for human rights and the most basic of freedoms. It is my fervent hope that there will be brighter days ahead for the relationship between our two countries. But we cannot take any steps in that direction until the regime ceases its deplorable activities. And until that day comes, we will remain steadfast in our efforts to stop Iranian aggression and to protect the United Kingdom. I commend this statement to the House.
David Lammy.
Hear, hear.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for advance sight and notice of his statement. In the last year, the charge sheet against the government of Iran has grown and grown. It has funded violent militia across the Middle East. It has supplied drones to Russia that menace Ukraine's cities, kill civilians and destroy infrastructure. It has continued to pursue its nuclear programme and breach of international commitments. And it has brutally suppressed the protests of young Iranians who dared to demand a better future. And in the last 12 months, it has executed more people than almost any country in the world. It continues to detain UK Iranian dual nationals, including Murad Tabaz and Miran Rauf, and continues to harass and threaten dissidents, even those who've made their home here in the United Kingdom. That the security services have foiled 15 plots against British-based individuals shows the scale of this hostile activity. This worsening extraterritorial threat must be met with strong and clear action. We cannot tolerate efforts to harass, silence, or threaten the welfare of regime critics here in the United Kingdom. And we must ensure that Iranian and British journalists can operate without fear or intimidation. At the end of last year, I called for the United Nations Human Rights Council to urgently investigate Iran's crackdown on protesters and for the government to bring forward stronger sanctions against the Iranian regime. Labour has also called for a new joint FCDO Home Office state threat cell to coordinate the action in government. So we welcome the measures that the Foreign Secretary has announced today. The government will be aware of the long-standing strength of feeling from many sides of the House and from members of the Iranian diaspora on the question of prescription of the IRGC. Labour proposed a new mechanism for prescription for state-linked actors in the National Security Bill, but the government unfortunately did not support it. I understand, of course, that there are diplomatic dimensions to this question, but I'm sure this House would welcome an update from him on the issue. I also want to ask the Foreign Secretary about the fate of UK-Iranian dual nationals. Labour has for a long time called for a new legal right for consular assistance to help protect British nationals. The government has rejected this. In April, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee put forward proposals to overhaul the way the Foreign Office tries to secure the release of British nationals overseas. Today, the government has largely rejected these too. Is the Foreign Office complacent on this issue, and what steps will it take to bring British nationals detained in Iran and elsewhere home? Finally, I wanted to ask about the future of the JCPOA. We supported the nuclear agreement as the best approach to preventing Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon, and we remain determined and committed to the vital non-proliferation goal. However, there is a clear and ongoing pattern of Iran breaching the JCPOA's terms, preventing monitoring and verification, and enriching uranium past the point of any civilian justification. And it's continued to violate UN Security Council Resolution 2231, including in its ballistic missile activities. The UK has a responsibility as one of the signatories of the JCPOA to take a leading role in containing Iran's nuclear ambitions and its related activities. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary about the prospects of negotiations on what some are calling a less-for-less deal? Mr Deputy Speaker, Iran is a country with an extraordinary and ancient history. It's courageous people who've risked their lives over the past year in pursuit of freedom. They deserve a government that respects their rights. Until that day, Labour will continue to support action to hold the Iranian regime to account.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I echo the Right Honourable Gentleman's comments about the Iranian people. And I've said it before, but I said again, our quarrel is not with the Iranian people. Iran is a country, as he says, with a huge and fabulous history, a sophisticated people, but sadly they are being let down badly by those who are in positions of leadership. He asks in our position, he asks us to update our position on prescription. Our position on prescription, I've discussed at the dispatch box before. We will always keep under review the response to Iranian state threats and other threats, some of which I've laid out in my statement to the House today. The RGC is sanctioned in its entirety, and certain individuals within it are individually sanctioned as well. But as I say, we do not regularly comment on future prescriptions or designations, but we do always keep our options under review. He makes a point with regard to the nature of our consular support. The government's position, we do not need a law for the government to do right by British people overseas, and we extend consular assistance to British nationals without the need for legislation instructing us to do so. And we do so even when the attention of the House is not focused on those individuals. There are many cases where we've had very successful consular outcomes for individuals who have never come into the consciousness of this House. We seek to do so always with the best interests of those British nationals at our heart. He will know that with regard to Iran, in certain circumstances, it is particularly difficult for us to discharge our duty and our responsibility for consular services, particularly of those people who are British dual nationals, because Iran does not recognise dual national status. But nevertheless, we will always seek to do right by those people who are incarcerated around the world, and indeed those people who are still in custody, incarcerated in Iran. And he speaks of the JCPOA. He is absolutely right that the UK is focused on ensuring that Iran does not acquire nuclear weapons technologies or capabilities. We work in close coordination with our friends in the E3 in the United States of America on this. It is a regular subject of conversation that I have with foreign minister colleagues across the Quad, and I can reassure him and the House that preventing the acquisition of nuclear weapons technology will remain a priority, the priority within our Iran strategy, and we will continue to explore ways of deterring Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon and preventing it from happening.
Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome this new geographically autonomous sanctions regime? It is an important step in demonstrating that defence is not an escalation and we will be strong at home. I also welcome the referral yesterday of Iran to the ICJ as a result of the shooting down of the Ukrainian aircraft in 2020, which the UK is doing with our allies. That again is a good step. As the Honourable Gentleman said, this morning we did release our report into hostage-taking, and can I urge my right honourable friend to give us an update on Morad Tabas, because it matters that his name is heard time and time again, particularly given how ill he is. And finally, given that we have now created an autonomous regime, can I urge my honourable friend to consider a regime on the Chinese Communist Party? They have sanctions as House, they continually perpetrate transnational repression, and this week alone they put bounties on the heads of 3 individuals who sought refuge here. And can I also ask him to haul in the Chinese ambassador to raise how unacceptable this is and how obscene and in breach of international law it is?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend raises important points, and I welcome her comments on the structures that we have put in place today and we'll be putting forward with legislation to the House in due course. We recognise that no one element of our response on its own will resolve all these issues, but they do have a cumulative effect. And I can assure her that we continue to work in close coordination with our international allies to maximise the impact of our sanctions response and to ensure that Iran recognises, as she said in her question, that this is a response to their actions. If they do not like this response, they should change their actions. And with regard to sanctions for other nations, she will know, but the House and the Department have heard the point that she's made. She will know that we do not routinely speculate on sanctions that we may bring forward. But I can assure her that whenever I have interactions with representatives of the Chinese government, I raise Hong Kong and the sanctioning of British parliamentarians and the fundamental disagreement we have with their actions in relation to the Uyghur Muslims at every single opportunity.
Brendan O'Hara.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank the Foreign Secretary for prior sight of his statement. I'd like to begin by putting on record the SNP's broad support for this wide-ranging package of measures to be taken against the regime in Tehran. And the Foreign Secretary was absolutely right when he says that the exporting of international terrorism by Iran cannot and will not and must not be tolerated. And much of what is in this statement is what we on these benches, indeed this entire House, have been calling on for some time. But can I helpfully suggest that the legislation which will come before the end of the year needs to come as quickly as possible, and if the Foreign Secretary could even roughly put a date on when that might happen, that would be helpful. I'm pleased that action has been taken against those who are complicit in doing this brutal regime's bidding, whether it be military, security or the judiciary, and I welcome the news that 5 of the most senior officials from that barbaric prison system have been sanctioned too, particularly those in the notorious Evan prison, which Nazaddeen Zaghari Ratcliffe was held in, which used as a brutal tool of repression against those many brave young women who recently stood up against the regime, and where they were held, tortured and murdered within that system. Could I also ask the Foreign Secretary to explain why the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps have been sanctioned and not prescribed? We were told 6 months ago by the Security Minister that they were to be prescribed as a terrorist organisation, and I think many of us, on seeing the statement being heralded, would have thought that that would have been part of it, and what the difference between a sanctioned organisation and a prescribed organisation is. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, in light of what was contained or the continued support that Iran has for Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, why has his department not tightened up further those Iran-specific export controls and sanctions on those dual-use companies to stop the export of materials to Iran from the UK that could subsequently be made into weapons? Thank you.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for welcoming the measures that we have taken. He asked once again about prescription, and he will have heard my earlier response. We always keep options available. I think within his question, he I think outlines one of the key issues on this. He says that his party are calling on the UK government to prescribe the IRGC, and then he goes on to say that he would like an explanation of the difference between prescription and sanctions. And I recognise that people see prescription as the most desired outcome without necessarily understanding that much of what I suspect people want to see from what they believe to be the outcome of prescription is actually already in place. Asset freezes, travel bans, and the suite of responses is kept constantly under review, but I can assure him we will always take actions, as we've set out in the statement today. We will always take actions that we believe are in the best interest of protecting the British nationals, both here and overseas, and also those Iranians who have made their home in the UK. He asked about the timetabling for legislation. The House will understand that is something that I'll need to discuss with the Leader of the House and the business managers, but I can assure him that we regard our response to Iran as a priority and will seek to bring this forward with as much expediency as we're able.
Teresa Villiers.
A constituent of mine has on repeated occasions raised serious concerns about the connections between the Islamic Centre of England and the IRGC in the Office of the Supreme Leader. He also believes there could be such connections between the Supreme Leader and an Islamic Centre in Manchester. So what is the government doing to ensure that UK-based charities like these two can in no way ever be a threat to the security of Iranian dissidents in the United Kingdom?
My right honourable friend raises a very important point. My department have discussed this with the Home Office, and indeed I have discussed this with my right honourable friend, the Security Minister. I can reassure her and the House that he takes very seriously indeed, the actions of organisations that she has mentioned, and obviously we wish to ensure that the Charity Commission also fully discharges its duty to make sure that any organisation under its remit is not used to harass or persecute foreign nationals or indeed British people here in the UK.
Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Issues that are faced by Iranian citizens, especially women, are raised with me frequently by constituents in Putney and Southfields and Roehampton. I'm stopped in the street many times to talk about this issue. British-Iranian dual national Murad Tabaz has already been mentioned in this statement. He remains arbitrarily detained in terrible conditions in Iran, almost 4 years after he was sentenced in 2019. Could the Foreign Secretary say more about to the House about the last time that he raised Murad's case with his Iranian counterparts, and what strategy is in place to secure his release, difficult though that is?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the last time I had face-to-face contact with a representative, a minister of the Iranian regime was in 21. But my officials regularly raise consular issues, including detainees, with our Iranian counterparts. I can assure her and the House that this remains a priority. I have met with Murad Tabaz's family on a number of occasions. My right honourable friend, the Minister for the region, Lord Ahmed, has met with them very recently, I think within the last few weeks. This remains a priority for us, and I can assure her that we will continue to work with the United States of America, because he's a tri-national, to bring about his permanent release and ability to come home and rejoin his family.
Deputy Speaker, in welcoming these sanctions, can I ask the Foreign Secretary to look at Iran's activities elsewhere? He's already mentioned the Russian drones, provision of Russian drones. I hear rumours that Iran have also provided drones to the Polisario in southern Algeria, which could destabilise a very fragile peace with the Moroccans in Western Sahara, a space that's governed by the UN. Indeed, it's perfectly credible that the Iranians are also involved in places like Tigray and South Sudan, destabilising a whole continent as a lever of political power.
My right honourable friend, who knows the continent of Africa and its politics incredibly well, is absolutely right to highlight the fact that Iranian malign activity is not restricted to its own near neighbourhood or indeed the United Kingdom. We look very carefully at the credible reporting of the support through military equipment, not just to Russia in their attack against Ukraine, but militia groups and other military groups in the region and across Africa. And I can reassure him that we will absolutely take that into consideration when it comes to any future sanctions response that we have towards the Iranian regime.
Deputy Speaker, may I start by welcoming his statement, and I look forward to supporting the legislation so it can pass as quickly as possible. We are all anxious to do whatever we can to support the people of Iran. Now, Mahsa Amini was an inspiration to women not just in her own country but across the world. And the fact that the people who did this to her, the IRGC, have not been held to account is itself a tragedy. Would the Foreign Secretary back the campaign, therefore, to rename the street of the Iranian embassy after her, so that every business card, every email, every piece of post that they have to receive and send has her name on it? It worked with South Africa and Nelson Mandela. I think the time is right to do it for her now.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady makes an incredibly important point about the courage of Iranian women, the courage genuinely beyond measure. I have seen open source footage of Iranian women and actually Iranian men standing up against the so-called morality police and others. She will know that the naming of thoroughfares is not a decision for central government, but rather for local government. But she makes an incredibly important point, and perhaps the planning committee of the local council might take that on board.
Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Earlier this year, the British group of the Interparliamentary Union hosted an event for BBC Persian, where we heard incredibly powerful testimony from the journalists that were reporting on the very incident that the Honourable Lady opposite referred to, those women's protests. The freedom of those journalists to report is under great threat from the Iranian regime. So I welcome very much what my right honourable friend has announced today. But can he confirm both the government's support for the continuation of BBC Persian service and that Iran International will be able to return to the UK?
My right honourable friend echoes the government's strength of feeling about media freedom. I can reassure her and the House that in my conversations with the very, very senior leadership of the BBC, I made a specific point about the importance of BBC Persia as part of the wider positive influence on the world that BBC World Service has had. We came to a funding arrangement with the BBC World Service to ensure that, certainly for the life of this Parliament, there will be no language services closed, because I recognise that in times of disinformation and times of oppression, the voices of truth and freedom, as personified by the hard-working colleagues in the BBC Persian service, is more important than ever.
Mr. Lawson. Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I'm slightly puzzled that the Foreign Secretary just told the Liberal Democrat spokesperson that foreign policy decisions can be passed to local authorities. I don't know what the Levelling Up Secretary would say about that. But I'm concerned very much by what he said a few moments ago about, in relation to my constituent Ali Reza Akbari, who was executed, as he knows, earlier this year, that he said that he hadn't had any direct contact with the Iranian regime for 2 years. And I know that the family wanted him to do that. There remain people like Murad Tabaz who are in custody in Tehran. Does he not think he should be doing more to try and get them released from that way, and that talking to the
Iranian technologies, whether they be drone technologies or others. I absolutely take the point that he makes about the sunset clauses in JCPOA. We are very alive to that. It's a conversation I regularly have with my E3 and United States counterparts. And I can reassure him that preventing that brutal technology falling into the hands of Russia or indeed anyone else remains an absolute priority for the government.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Iran has made no secret of its efforts to arm, fund and train Palestinian terror groups in the West Bank. The leader of Palestinian Islamic Jihad has even said that its terrorists depend on Iranian-supplied weaponry, the very same group which has turned Jenin into a city of terror. So I'm sure my right honourable friend will agree with me that we should condemn this destabilising activity, but far more than that, it is horrendous examples such as this that double underline the need for the very welcome toolkit of measures he has announced this afternoon, not just to have them in our own arsenal, but to use them.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I commend my honourable friend with for the passion and consistency of his championing of this of this issue. I completely agree with him that the support for violence and terrorism, not just in the West Bank, but more broadly across the Middle East, is completely wrong, and we will always stand up against it. The sad truth is that the Palestinian people suffer because of the export of Iranian violence into the region. We continue to work as a cornerstone of our foreign policy to bring about peace between the Israeli people and the Palestinian people. That is not helped by the violent interference of Iran, and we will continue to take action to deter and prevent it.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome this package of strengthened sanctions. Last weekend I attended the Free Iran Global Summit, which was attended by a range of former Prime Ministers, former Vice Presidents, former Foreign Ministers, representatives from 52 parliaments and around 10 members and former members from across this place, which roundly, of course, condemns the gross violations of human rights in Iran, particularly the 300 uses of the death penalty, the oppression of women, but the killing also of 70 innocent children through shooting and poisoning. The conference discussed the issue of the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, I've heard what my right honourable friend has said about prescription of the organisation in its entirety, but would he assure me that he would keep that step very much under close review?
I can assure my honourable friend that we take a thoughtful approach, but a firm and decisive approach to our posture with regard to Iran. I will always keep all options under a review. We will always act in what we believe to be the best interests of our own security, but also the safety and security of our friends in the region. And indeed, as she has said, the Iranian people who find themselves brutalised by their own government. And so when I say we keep these things under review, I genuinely mean it, and nothing in terms of our response would be put permanently off the table or beyond use. But the announcements that I made today, added to the pre-existing sanctions packages, gives us a powerful tool of deterrent for Iranian behaviour, which we intend to utilise fully if Iran's behaviour doesn't change. And I will finish on this point, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The power is in Iran's hands. Were they to change their behaviour, were they to stop funding terrorism and militia groups in the area, were they to stop pursuing nuclear weapons, and were they to stop brutalising their people, we would be able to change our posture towards them. The power is in their hands.
I'd like to thank the Foreign Secretary for making the statement that he has today. We're now going to move on to the backbench motion on the role and status of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. And I call Dame Maria Miller to move.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And can I start by thanking the Backbench Business Committee for securing this timely and important debate. And I beg to move the motion that this House supports the work of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, asks for parliamentary time at the earliest opportunity to change the status of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association from a UK charity to an international parliamentary organisation, and calls on the government to effect that change. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in today's debate, I'm speaking on behalf of CPA UK executive members, members of Parliament who value the work of the CPA, and indeed parliamentarians from across the British Islands and Mediterranean region, the region of which we are part within the CPA. And I know there are many honourable and right honourable members here who have enjoyed, benefited and participated in many different activities, including the Honourable Lady sitting on the opposition bench, the Honourable Lady who is responding for Liberal Democrats, and many others as well. So this is an organisation which is held dear in the heart of parliamentarians both here in the UK and abroad. But Mr Deputy Speaker, the CPA is at a turning point and needs the help of the UK government to act now to secure its future. because in the UK, only the government can change the status of the UK, of the CPA, from a local UK charity to a bespoke international interparliamentary organisation, because it needs to allocate parliamentary time to allow a short piece of primary legislation to be passed. Now, for many years, it's been acknowledged that the CPA's status as a UK charity is not appropriate for an association of equals. The CPA membership includes parliamentarians from South Africa to Singapore, from Ghana to Guyana, from Canada to Cyprus. All are equal members of this organisation, one of the oldest Commonwealth organisations. Its status as a UK charity is completely out of kilter with the reality of the organisation's work. The CPA was founded, yes, back in 1911 to promote the advancement of parliamentary democracy. But continuing to be a UK charity today simply reinforces an outdated vision of the Commonwealth and the UK's place in it. Long-standing demands for recognition of its modern status as a bespoke international interparliamentary organisation reached boiling point at the General Assembly meeting in Canada, in Halifax, Canada last year, where it was decided that unless substantial progress had been made to change the status of the organisation within 12 months, then members would resolve to move the headquarters from the UK. Now, a change in status will allow the CPA to more effectively serve its members, removing damaging frictions caused by an inappropriate status and making clear all members are on equal footing to reflect the modern view of the Commonwealth and representing the CPA's own principles of equality and diversity. And in the UK, this requires primary legislation. Now, to assist the government, I have retabled a short bill, first introduced by my honourable friend, the member for Bridgewater and West Somerset, around a year ago, Mr Deputy Speaker, to make those changes quickly and at no cost. And I reiterate, at no cost. It's a point that's already been agreed with FCDO officials, leaving no policy differences really between the CPA and FCDO in taking this forward as an issue. Now, the bill has widespread cross-party support, both here and in the other place, but requires parliamentary time to be passed. And I hope my right honourable friend, who I know is sitting there having picked up the reins on this at relatively short notice, and I very much appreciate that, and I know the whole House will, I hope that she might be able to confirm today that parliamentary time is being made available, because our time is running out. Over the many years of discussion between the CPA and probably FCO before it became FCDO, policy differences by and large have been resolved. Particularly, the change in status is not seen under the International Organisations Act 1968 because the CPA does not fit those criteria, an issue that I think was dealt with when others were chairing the organisation. And hence my bill, which my right honourable friend will have seen, is tabled requiring a bespoke status, not a status under that Act, which would have caused, I understand, absolutely problems. And the new bill has no extra costs to the UK taxpayer over and above the tax advantages already available to a charity, a UK charity, which the CPA already is. If we don't make significant progress on this legislation before the summer recess, then the UK's hosting of the CPA Secretariat will be lost. That will create a very real risk, I think, for the whole organisation, given the very different views on its possible future. An apparent lack of prioritisation in the UK places in question our commitment to the Commonwealth institutions themselves, or indeed our reputation could be unnecessarily diminished, and all for not making this very small change that requires legislation. Now, as the Minister will be aware, the CPA has given very good notice of its concerns and the need for change, and to put it simply, parliamentarians from many countries take issue with having to make CPA subscription payments from their taxpayers' money to a UK charity. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I'm extremely grateful for the Right Honourable Member for giving way, and I congratulate her on having secured this debate. I want to put on record my and the Liberal Democrat support for her bill, which should be very simple to pass, but also to make the point that in my dealings with other parliamentarians across the world, actually the fact that the CPA is held here in the mother of parliaments matters a lot to them. They feel that it's important for them to see how it's done by the oldest institution. We also gain a huge amount from it. And would she agree that the loss of that, I think, would be unconscionable to this place?
Yes, I mean, there are many members here present today who will have known the value of meeting with incoming delegations and indeed being part of outward delegations. It gives us as parliamentarians an understanding of the world in which we're operating in a way which I know there are other organisations, including the IPA, and we're very pleased to have the chair of the IPA with us today. These are organisations that are valued by parliamentarians, and we need to make sure that the government is aware of that and takes the appropriate action. I really want to reiterate this point, though, in terms of the reason why this change in status is so important. And I go back to the payments that are made to the CPA from countries who are members, from members ultimately from their taxpayers' money to what is a UK charity. And these concerns are held most strongly by parliamentary colleagues in the Africa region of the CPA. And that's understandable. It is incongruous at best for them to be making payments to an international organisation and for their membership of that international organisation when it looks on their books as if they're making payments to UK charities. And we really have to understand that and sympathise and empathise with it. Now, other organisations have already ensured they're structured in an appropriate way. French legislation underpins the CPA's Francophone counterpart, the Assemblée Parlementaire de la Francophonie in Paris, bad pronunciation. The Interparliamentary Union also has a Geneva headquarters agreement with Switzerland. So the need to follow those international examples is particularly true for an international institution like the CPA, which is all about the importance of parliamentary democracy. And the Commonwealth Charter, to which we and our fellow member states have signed up to, commits us to that. Now, this Parliament's actions regarding the CPA status may appear to be peripheral to some, but in fact, they spill over into our relations with very near family members. Other members of the British family who are involved in the CPA include the devolved legislatures in the UK, the Crown dependencies, the overseas territories. They're all active members, Mr Deputy Speaker, and they too support the need to resolve this situation. So the government needs to take that much more into account, not least because those organisations are concerned that they could be potentially damaged by association should Westminster not be able to resolve this amicably. All also look to His Majesty the King as head of state. So do the 14 other realms. And at the coronation in June, we saw the huge importance attached to the Commonwealth, with His Majesty now head of the Commonwealth in succession to her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth. At its April meeting in Gibraltar, the CPA executive agreed to continue to support efforts to persuade the UK government to make the necessary changes. But to be very clear, this is contingent upon achieving new legislation by the CPA's Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference taking place in Ghana at the end of September in just a few short weeks. The House should know that the CPA executive is already working on a relocation package for the Secretariat, including a timeline and procedure for assessing future host countries. This is not a hollow threat. This is something that is actually happening already. Again, to restate, should new legislation not be achieved by the UK by the end of September, the organisation will proceed with relocation outside of the UK from October 23 onwards. There appears to be absolutely no reason why this bill should take much parliamentary time, given the clear support in both houses, and my honourable friend, the right honourable friend, the Minister, will have heard that already from the other benches. It involves no additional costs for the UK taxpayer. It's been suggested that any change in status would create an unhelpful or an unwelcome precedent. Well, with respect, that argument does not bear any scrutiny at all. The CPA's case is unique. An international interparliamentary organisation headquartered in the UK. There are no others. When we pressed for other examples of comparators, Mr Deputy Speaker, not a single one on the list could make a similar case. Some were international organisations, undoubtedly worthy, but headquartered elsewhere, and without any particular link to the UK. There were territories or groups of states and governments, again, completely different and not parliamentary in category. and obviously not headquartered here in the UK. Legislation to recognise the status of the CPA and the Secretariat location here in the UK does not create a precedent and cannot credibly be put forward as a reason for inaction. Parliamentarians from around the globe tell us they would like the CPA Secretariat to remain in London. London works well as a location for the Secretariat here on the parliamentary estate. The Secretariat can attract talented staff from a diverse pool. Hosting the CPA is a small but an important example of the UK's soft power, and I hope my right honourable friend the Minister can use her good offices to ensure that time is given to pass the modest bill required to change the status of the CPA in the time remaining before the annual Assembly meeting in September, demonstrating not only our commitment to the Commonwealth, but also the importance of strong democracies around the world. Thank you.
The question is, as on the order paper. I shall call the front bench spokespeople at the end of the debate. Sir James Dudridge.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm sorry to tell you I've been an abject failure